far beyond the edges of ordinary maps, where the mountains fold into clouds and time seems to slow its breath. There exists a place few ever find twice. It is not marked on any compass, not spoken of in any official history, and yet it has always been there. The Academy of Eldermore. On nights when the wind is still enough to carry secrets instead of noise, travelers sometimes swear they see faint lights, drifting above the treetops, like floating lanterns guiding lost dreams home. But by morning, there is nothing but mist and silence again. This is where our story begins. A boy named Arlen stood at the edge of a narrow stone bridge, his small suitcase trembling slightly in his hand. Not from fear, but from anticipation he did not yet understand. He was not extraordinary, at least not in the way stories usually begin, or so he thought. Arlen had grown up in a quiet coastal village where the biggest mystery was why the tide changed its mood so often. But everything shifted the day a sealed letter arrived at his door without a knock, carried by a bird no one could name. The letter simply said, "You are expected at Eldermore Academy. When the mist rises, step forward." No signature, no explanation, only certainty. Now, standing at the bridge, Arlen watched the world he knew fade behind him, like a dream slipping out of memory. The air ahead was different, thicker, warmer, almost alive. As he stepped forward, the stone beneath his feet responded softly, like it recognized him. The mist curled around his ankles but did not resist him. Instead, it guided him forward, as if it had been waiting. With every step, the world changed. The bridge stretched longer than it should have. The trees leaned closer, whispering in a language just out of reach. And somewhere far above, unseen bells rang, not loudly, but gently, like they were calling something awake. Arlen felt it then, a strange warmth in his chest, as if something inside him had been sleeping for a very long time. When he finally reached the other side, Eldermore Academy revealed itself slowly, like a thought forming in a dream. Tall towers rose from floating stone platforms. Bridges of glowing glass connected buildings that seemed to shift slightly when not looked at directly. Lanterns drifted through the air with no visible flame, pulsing softly like breathing stars. And everywhere, students. Some walked with books that turned their own pages. Some whispered to shadows that listened carefully. Some simply stood still, as if listening to something only they could hear. Arlen realized he was not the only one who had arrived for the first time. A bell rang once, not loud, but final. A voice, calm and ancient, seemed to rise from the air itself. New arrivals. Proceed to the Hall of Echoes. Arlen followed the flow of students across a bridge that felt like it was made of moonlight, hardened into glass. Beneath him, he saw not water, but shifting reflections of places he had never been, cities that didn't exist, forests that moved like waves, skies filled with unfamiliar constellations. He looked away quickly. Something about them felt like they were looking back. At the entrance of the Hall of Echoes, massive doors slowly opened without touch. Inside, the air was warmer, quieter, almost comforting. The ceiling was impossibly high, filled with slow-moving lights like drifting memories. The floor shimmered faintly, as though it remembered every step taken upon it. And there, at the far end of the hall, stood the instructors. They did not introduce themselves. They did not need to. One of them raised a hand, and the entire hall fell into silence. Not forced, but natural, like the world itself had decided to pause. Every student here carries something unseen, the instructor said. Not power, not knowledge, something older, A pause. Awakening. Arlen felt his heartbeat slow, as if the word had settled inside him. The instructor's gaze moved across the new arrivals. Tonight, they continued, you will not learn spells. You will not choose houses. You will not be told who you are meant to become. A soft hush moved through the hall. You will only listen. The lights above dimmed slightly, and for the first time, Arlen noticed it. A faint sound beneath everything, like distant wind moving through an endless corridor, or a story being told just outside of hearing. He could not tell if it was real, or if it had always been inside him. And somewhere deep within the Academy of Eldermore, something responded. Not loudly, not yet, but it had noticed his arrival, and it was beginning to wake. Arlen stood among the other new arrivals as the Hall of Echoes slowly settled into a deeper silence. It wasn't an empty silence. It felt full, like a held breath waiting for permission to move again. The instructors did not walk. They seemed to shift positions between moments, as if the space itself adjusted to place them where they needed to be. The same voice from before returned, calm and layered, as if more than one speaker existed inside it. You have been brought here not to be filled, it said, but to be revealed. A soft murmur passed through the students, but it faded quickly, as though the hall itself absorbed unnecessary sound. Arlen felt strangely light, like his thoughts were no longer, pressing against the inside of his mind as firmly as before. It wasn't sleepiness. It was something quieter, a loosening. A bell chimed once again, but this time it did not echo. Instead, it sank inward, like it was traveling through water rather than air. Follow the light threads, the voice instructed. Only then did Arlen notice them. Thin strands of glowing light began to appear across the floor. They were not drawn or projected. They simply became visible, as though they had always been there, waiting for attention. Each thread moved slowly, like drifting ink in water, guiding students in different directions. Arlen hesitated only a moment before stepping onto one of them. Immediately, the world around him shifted. The Hall of Echoes did not vanish, but it felt farther away, like a memory being observed instead of lived. The light beneath his feet pulsed gently with every step, responding to him in subtle ways. As he followed the path, other students separated into different routes. Some disappeared behind tall archways. Others climbed stairways that curved upward into dim light. A few were guided downward, where the air seemed heavier and quieter. Arlen did not know where he was going, but he did not feel lost. The corridor he entered was narrower, lined with tall stone pillars that seemed to breathe faintly. Between them, soft reflections shimmered, fleeting images of unfamiliar places. He saw a lake with black glass, water reflecting stars that were not in the sky above him. He saw a field where books floated like birds. He saw a city built inside a hollow mountain, glowing softly from within. Each vision faded as quickly as it appeared. The further he walked, the more he felt something subtle unfolding inside him, like a door slowly unlocking without a key. Eventually, the corridor opened into a circular chamber. In the center stood a shallow pool of still water, perfectly smooth, reflecting nothing of the ceiling above. Around the pool, 6 stone chairs were arranged in a circle. 5 of them were already occupied by instructors. The 6th remained empty. Arlen stopped at the edge of the room, unsure whether he was meant to enter. One of the instructors tilted their head slightly. "You hear it," they said softly. It wasn't a question. Arlen hesitated. "Hear what?" A faint smile appeared, though not warm or cold. Simply knowing. The space between thoughts. The words made no immediate sense. yet they settled into him in a way that felt familiar. The instructor gestured toward the pool. "Step closer." Arlen moved forward slowly. The water remained undisturbed, even as he approached it closely enough to see his reflection should have appeared. But there was none. Instead, the surface showed faint movement beneath it, like something stirring in deep sleep. "Every student arrives with noise inside them," another instructor said quietly. "Memories, questions, expectations, even fears." A pause. "The academy does not remove them." The water beneath Arlen began to glow faintly. "It listens through them." Without warning, the surface of the pool rippled once. A sound emerged, not from the water, but from everywhere at once. It was not a voice. It was more like meaning forming itself into sound. Arlen instinctively placed a hand over his chest, as if something inside him had shifted. The instructors watched silently. The sound continued, faint and layered, like multiple stories overlapping without conflict. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence returned. But it was different now. Heavier, more aware. "You are early," one of the instructors finally said. Arlen blinked. "Early for what?" No one answered immediately. Instead, all 5 instructors looked at him, not with surprise but recognition, as though they had been expecting this moment, even if not this timing. "The academy responds to awakenings in its own order," another said. "Not all arrive when they are invited. Some arrive when they are needed." Arlen felt a slight tightening in his chest. "I don't understand," he admitted. A soft exhale passed through the chamber, almost like shared patience. "You will," the first instructor said gently. But not yet. The water in the pool dimmed again, returning to stillness. One of the instructors raised a hand, and a thin strand of light emerged from the surface, floating upward toward Arlen. It stopped just in front of him. "Touch it," they said. Arlen hesitated only briefly before reaching out. The moment his fingers made contact, warmth spread through him, not burning, not sharp, but deep and resonant, like something answering a long-forgotten call. For a split second he saw something. Not a place, not a memory, a sensation of vastness, as if the world he knew was only one layer among many, and something beneath it had just opened its eyes. Then it was gone. He stumbled slightly, catching himself. The instructors did not react, only observed. "You are connected," one finally said. Arlen swallowed. "To what?" The instructor looked at the empty chair beside the pool. "Not to what," they corrected softly. "To when?" A pause followed. Then, as if the conversation had reached its natural pause rather than an end, the instructors rose. The chamber responded immediately, the light shifting as if acknowledging dismissal. "You will return here," the voice said, "when the academy is ready to speak further." Arlen turned slightly, unsure of where to go next, but the glowing thread had already returned, waiting at the chamber's edge, guiding him onward once more. As he followed it back into the shifting corridors, one thought lingered in his mind, unspoken but growing clearer with each step. This place was not just teaching him, it was noticing him. The glowing thread led Arlen away from the circular chamber and back into the shifting corridors of Eldermore Academy. But something had changed. The air no longer felt like it was simply guiding him. It felt like it was watching how he responded to being guided. Every step he took echoed slightly differently, as if the corridor itself was adjusting to his presence in real time. The floating lanterns above him dimmed and brightened in slow rhythm, almost like breathing. Eventually, the corridor widened into a long hall lined with tall, arched windows. Through them, Arlen saw something that made him slow his steps. Outside, there was no stable sky. Instead, there were overlapping layers of it, different shades of twilight. Morning and night existing at the same time, shifting like pages being turned too slowly. He looked away again. The academy did not feel like a place that liked being looked at too directly. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly open. No signs, no markings, just quiet expectation. As Arlen stepped inside, he found himself in a classroom that did not resemble any classroom he had ever imagined. There were no desks, no chairs in rows. Instead, the room was circular, with soft stone steps descending toward a center platform made of smooth, dark material that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Around the walls, shelves held objects that did not stay still in memory. Every time Arlen tried to focus on one, it seemed slightly different. A feather that occasionally turned into dust. A book that sometimes had no pages. A small hourglass where the sand flowed upward instead of down. Several other students were already there. Some stood quietly. Others shifted uneasily. A few seemed completely calm, as if they already understood something Arlen had not yet touched. Then the instructor entered. They were not the same as before. This one was younger in appearance, but their presence carried an unusual weight, like still water hiding depth. They did not introduce themselves. Instead, they simply said, "Sit where you feel the silence is strongest." The students hesitated. Some laughed softly, unsure if it was a trick, but slowly they began to move. Arlen stayed still for a moment longer, then closed his eyes briefly. Silence was not absence here. Silence was direction. He walked toward a spot near the center platform, where the air felt less noisy. When he sat down, nothing changed visibly. But internally, something did. The room felt slightly closer, more aware. The instructor stepped onto the center platform. "Today," they said, "you will learn to listen without sound." A few students exchanged confused looks. The instructor continued without reacting. "Everything you know about learning assumes information comes toward you." A pause. "That is not how Eldermore works." They raised one hand slightly. Immediately, the objects on the shelves began to shift more noticeably. The feather dissolved into light. The book folded into itself like paper, remembering it had once been flat. The hourglass stopped its upward flow and became still. Arlen felt a faint pressure behind his eyes, like his attention was being gently pulled outward. "Here," the instructor said, "you do not receive knowledge." A slow step forward. "You align with it." The room dimmed slightly, not in darkness, but in focus. Arlen noticed it then. The silence was no longer just around them. It was between them, between thoughts, between breaths, between meaning. The instructor gestured. "Close your eyes." Arlen hesitated only a moment before obeying. At first there was nothing. Then faintly he became aware of presence, not voices, not images, something subtler, like patterns of intention brushing past his awareness. He felt something like curiosity nearby, then hesitation, then calm. He couldn't tell if it came from him or someone else. The boundary felt unclear. "Do not search for thoughts," the instructor's voice said gently. "Let them pass without naming them." Arlen tried, but trying created noise. So instead, he stopped trying. Something shifted, very softly. The room did not change, but his perception of it did. He could now sense the other students not as bodies, but as layers of awareness. Some were sharp and focused. Some were scattered. One felt like a distant storm of restless energy. And beneath all of them, something else, a deeper current. Like the room itself had thoughts too, but very slow ones. Arlen felt it then. A pull, not external, internal, as if something inside him was responding to something outside him that had no form. His breathing slowed without effort. The edges of his awareness softened, and for a brief moment, he understood something without words. That learning here was not addition. It was recognition. "Open your eyes," the instructor said quietly. Arlen did. The room was exactly as before, but he was not. Something subtle had shifted in how he perceived everything. Even the light felt slightly more meaningful. The instructor watched the group carefully. "Some of you felt it," they said. "Most of you only brushed against it." Their gaze briefly lingered on Arlen. But one or two, they added, did not resist it. A quiet tension moved through the students. Arlen looked down at his hands. They felt the same, but also not. The instructor stepped down from the platform. "This academy does not teach you spells first," they said. "It teaches you perception." A pause. "And perception is what shapes everything that follows." They turned slightly, as if concluding the session, but stopped before leaving. "One final thing," they added. The room stilled again. "There are rooms in this academy that do not appear on schedules." A slight pause. "If you find one, do not assume it is meant for you." Another pause. "Or that it is not." The silence that followed was heavier than before. Then, without further explanation, the instructor left. The room slowly returned to normal light. Students began to move, whispering quietly, confused, curious, unsettled. But Arlen remained seated for a moment longer, because just before the instructor left, he thought he felt something glance back at him, from somewhere not in the room, but in the academy itself. The classroom slowly dissolved, back into normal motion as students began leaving in small, uncertain groups. Some whispered excitedly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Others stayed quiet, as if speaking would disturb something fragile they had just touched. Arlen didn't move immediately. What stayed with him was not the instructor's words, but the feeling that something had responded to him during the silence exercise. Not loudly, not clearly, just enough to be noticed. A subtle awareness, like a door that had briefly unlocked, and then pretended it was never locked in the first place. When he finally stood, the others were already gone. The room felt slightly emptier than before, but also more attentive. As Arlen stepped out into the corridor again, the glowing thread that had guided him earlier was gone. For the first time since arriving, he had no direction. He walked slowly. The academy did not feel the same twice in a row. The corridor he had entered after class seemed longer than before, with turns that had not existed when he arrived. Lanterns floated near the ceiling, but their light was uneven now. Some brighter, some dimmer, as if reacting to something unseen passing through them. Arlen paused at an intersection. 3 paths, none marked, none familiar. He tried to remember how he had come, but the memory refused to stay still. It kept shifting slightly every time he focused on it, like a reflection disturbed by water. That was when he noticed it, a 4th path, very faint, almost invisible, a thin seam in the stone wall, pulsing softly with a light that didn't belong to the lanterns. It was not a doorway, not fully, more like an idea of a doorway. Arlen stared at it. Something about it felt wrong, not dangerous, not exactly, just unacknowledged, as if the academy itself had forgotten it existed, or had chosen not to remember. He looked around. No students nearby, no instructors, only the quiet breathing of the building itself. Slowly he stepped closer. The seam of light reacted faintly, brightening just slightly, like it had noticed him noticing it. Arlen hesitated, then placed his hand near the wall. The moment he did, the stone softened, not physically melting, but conceptually loosening, like reality itself was unsure whether it should remain solid. A narrow passage appeared, dark, but not empty, waiting. He stepped inside. Immediately, the sound of the academy behind him changed, not louder or quieter, just farther, as if distance had been added between him and everything he had known moments before. The corridor was narrow, sloping gently downward. The walls were smooth stone, but faintly warm to the touch, like something living long ago had passed through here and left memory behind. There were no lanterns, but there was light, not external, internal. The walls themselves emitted a faint glow, but only when he wasn't looking directly at them. As he walked deeper, something unusual happened. His thoughts became quieter, not forced, just less necessary. And in that quiet, he began to notice something else, a presence behind him. Not footsteps, not sound, more like attention. He stopped. The presence stopped too. He turned quickly. Nothing there, only the narrowing corridor stretching back into darkness. But the feeling remained. Watching without eyes, Arlen continued forward, slower now. The corridor began to change subtly. The stone walls occasionally showed faint impressions, like carvings that were not fully formed, shapes that almost became symbols, then refused to commit. At one point, he thought he saw a door in the wall, but when he looked directly at it, it became just stone again. His mind felt tested, not pressured, observed. Then he heard it. Not a voice, a pause in reality, a moment where everything felt like it had stopped deciding what it was. Arlen froze. The air thickened slightly. And then, a whisper, not in his ears, inside the space between thoughts. "You're not supposed to be here alone." His breath caught. He looked around sharply. No one, but the corridor felt different now. Less like a path, more like a decision that had been interrupted. Arlen backed up a step. The moment he did, the corridor behind him shifted. The entrance he came through was no longer visible, only more tunnel, continuing forward, or deeper, or somewhere that didn't care which direction he preferred. A quiet realization formed in him. He was inside something that had stopped behaving like a building. He forced himself to keep walking. The whisper did not repeat, but the presence did not leave. It stayed just behind his awareness, matching his pace perfectly. After what felt like a long time, the corridor widened into a circular chamber. Unlike the classroom earlier, this one was empty, completely. No chairs, no platforms, only a single structure in the center, a tall broken mirror. Its frame was ancient, cracked, and covered in markings that shifted slightly whenever he tried to focus on them. The mirror did not reflect the room. It reflected something else. At first, Arlen saw only darkness. Then slowly, shapes, moving, not clearly, like memories trying to form faces. He stepped closer. The presence behind him stopped. The mirror's surface rippled faintly, as if reacting to his attention. Arlen leaned in slightly, and for a brief moment, he saw himself, but not as he was. Older, still him, but carrying something in his eyes that he didn't understand yet. And behind that reflection, the academy, but awake, fully awake, watching back. Arlen stumbled backward instantly. The image disappeared. The mirror returned to darkness. His heartbeat was louder now, too loud for the silence of this place. Behind him, the whisper returned, closer this time, not threatening, just certain. "You found it," it said. Arlen turned slowly. Nothing there, but the feeling of presence had shifted. It was no longer behind him. It was around him, inside the room, inside the mirror, inside the academy itself. And then the mirror cracked slightly, not breaking, responding, like it had been waiting for that exact moment for a very long time. The crack in the mirror did not spread outward like normal glass. It spread inward, as if reality itself had learned how to fracture in reverse. Arlen stood frozen, watching the broken mirror in the center of the chamber. The room felt even quieter now, but not peaceful, More like something was holding its breath inside the walls, waiting to see what he would do next. The whisper had stopped, but its absence felt intentional. Slowly, Arlen stepped closer again. He told himself it was just glass, just reflections, just another strange object in a strange school. But the mirror did not behave like an object. It behaved like awareness. As he approached, the surface darkened again, then slowly began to brighten. Not with light, but with presence. Like something on the other side had noticed his hesitation, the reflection returned, at first only fragments. A hand, a face, his own eyes, but slightly unfocused, as if looking at him from just behind the moment he was standing in. Then more. The image stabilized. Arlen saw himself again. But this time, the older version did not disappear. It remained, watching him, not smiling, not warning, just knowing. Arlen whispered without meaning to. "Who are you?" The reflection did not move its lips immediately. Instead, the response felt delayed, as if it had to travel through layers of time before reaching him. "I am what you will remember," it said softly. Arlen stepped back. The voice was his, but not his current one. The mirror surface shimmered again, and suddenly, the scene behind the reflection changed. Now Arlen saw the academy, but not as he knew it. The halls were brighter, but emptier. The lanterns floated faster, like restless thoughts. And the walls, they were not just stone anymore. They were layered with symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. The entire place looked awake, alert, waiting. The older reflection turned slightly, as if acknowledging something behind Arlen in that distant version of the world. "You were not meant to find this room yet," it said calmly. Arlen swallowed. "Then why did I?" A pause. The reflection looked directly at him. "Because the academy is not a place you enter," it said. "It is a place that adjusts to you." The words settled heavily in the chamber. Behind Arlen, the air shifted. He didn't hear footsteps, but he felt the change, like the tension turning. He did not look back. The mirror did, and the reflection's expression changed for the first time. Not fear, recognition. "You brought it here," the reflection said. Arlen's voice cracked slightly. "Brought what?" The mirror surface flickered violently for a moment, then stabilized again, and behind his reflection, something else appeared, not clearly formed, not fully visible, but undeniably present. A shape that did not belong to any known structure of thought or matter. And it was inside the academy, not outside. Inside, Arlen turned slowly. The chamber behind him was empty, but the feeling of presence had intensified. Closer now, no longer just following, now observing directly. When he turned back to the mirror, the older version of him was still there, but its eyes were no longer focused on him. They were focused behind him. "Do not acknowledge it fully," the reflection said quietly. Arlen's throat tightened. "What happens if I do?" A pause. The mirror darkened slightly. Then the answer came. "You become part of its attention." The chamber lights dimmed further, not fading, hesitating, as if even the building itself was unsure whether it should continue behaving normally. Arlen took a slow step back, then another, but the mirror reacted immediately. The reflection moved closer, not physically, conceptually, like it was reducing the distance between versions of reality. "You are already connected," it said. "That is why it sees you." Arlen shook his head slightly. "I don't understand any of this." The reflection softened its expression for the first time. "That is the first correct response." The chamber began to subtly distort, not visually, structurally. The edges of the room felt less defined. like the idea of space was becoming uncertain. The mirror surface rippled once more, and the older Arlen raised a hand, not toward him, but toward something behind him. "Leave now," it said firmly. Arlen hesitated. "Now," it repeated. Something in the chamber shifted instantly. Not loud, not violent, decisive. The air behind Arlen tightened, like the space itself had decided to act. He turned and ran. As he exited the chamber, the corridor outside was different. The walls were no longer just stone. They were faintly reflective, like they had absorbed part of what he had just seen. And behind him, the mirror room sealed itself silently, not closing, forgetting how to be open. Arlen slowed his pace, breathing heavily. The presence was still there, but now it was no longer unclear. It was focused, and for the first time since arriving at Eldermore, he was certain of something. The Academy was not just observing him anymore. It was reacting to what had observed him. Arlen did not stop running until the corridor finally widened again. Even then, his pace slowed only slightly, as if his body did not fully trust the silence around him. The walls here looked normal at first glance, but something subtle had changed. The stone no longer felt like it was simply surrounding him. It felt like it was remembering him passing through. Every step he took left a faint hesitation in the air, like the Academy was briefly unsure whether that moment should have existed. He pressed a hand against the wall. It was warm, not physically warm, but aware. Arlen pulled his hand away quickly and kept moving. The feeling from the mirror room did not fade. It lingered in his awareness like a second heartbeat, one that did not belong to him. "You are already connected." The reflection's words kept repeating in his mind, not as sound, but as meaning that refused to dissolve. Connected to what? And why did it feel like the Academy itself had reacted the moment? That thing appeared behind him. The corridor eventually opened into a large atrium. Arlen slowed completely. This place was different. At first, it looked like a resting hall. Tall arches, floating lanterns, distant bridges crossing overhead. But something was wrong with it. The architecture was inconsistent. Parts of the atrium looked brand new, polished and glowing softly. Other sections looked ancient, worn, almost forgotten, and between them were gaps where the structure seemed unsure what form to take, as if the Academy had been rebuilt in different versions of itself and could not decide which one was real. Students passed through the space, but something felt off about them too. Some walked normally. Others paused mid-step for just a fraction too long, as if they had briefly forgotten why they were moving. One student turned their head toward Arlen, then immediately looked away, like recognizing something they were not supposed to acknowledge. Whispers moved through the air, but they were fragmented. Not full sentences, just pieces of thought drifting between minds. Arlen moved carefully through the atrium. He noticed something unsettling. The further he walked, the more attention he drew, but not from people. From the Academy itself. The floating lanterns dimmed slightly as he passed. A bridge overhead subtly shifted its alignment. A wall that had been solid a moment ago looked slightly uncertain, like it was reconsidering its existence. The Academy was reacting to him, not as a student, but as a problem. He stopped near a wide pillar. For a moment, everything around him paused, not physically, but perceptually. Even the ambient movement of light seemed to hesitate. Then he heard it again, not a whisper this time, a pressuring thought. "You should not remain visible." Arlen turned sharply. No one there, but the message did not feel external. It felt distributed, like the entire structure of the Academy had briefly agreed on it. A distant bell rang. Once, low, controlled. Immediately, the atmosphere changed. Students nearby slowed their movements. Conversations stopped mid-flow. The floating lanterns stabilized into perfect stillness. And then, almost in unison, several heads turned toward Arlen. Not aggressively, not curiously, assessing. Arlen felt his chest tighten. Something was being decided. Without him, he began to move again, faster this time. But the atrium responded. A pathway he was heading toward subtly redirected. Another corridor closed off with shifting architecture that hadn't been there seconds before. The academy was not blocking him violently. It was simply reorganizing itself around his presence. "You are causing divergence," a voice said nearby. Arlen turned. An instructor stood a few steps away. Not the same one as before. This one was older, calmer, but their eyes were sharp in a way that suggested they were constantly observing multiple realities at once. "What does that mean?" Arlen asked quickly. The instructor studied him for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Most students align with the academy's structure," they said. "They follow its pathways. They fit inside its memory." A pause. "You do not." Arlen frowned. "I'm just trying to learn what this place is." The instructor's gaze softened slightly. "That is precisely the problem," they said. Before Arlen could respond, the instructor lifted a hand. The air around them shifted subtly, not magical, more like reality adjusting its focus. "This academy," the instructor continued, "is built on consistency, repetition, recognition." Another pause. "And you are introducing uncertainty." Arlen looked around the atrium again. For the first time, he noticed it clearly. Some parts of the structure near him were subtly unstable, not collapsing, not breaking, just undecided, like they were struggling to remain the same while he was nearby. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. The instructor nodded. "That is also part of the issue." A silence formed between them, not empty, heavy with implication. Then the instructor spoke again. "There are sections of this academy that rely on being unobserved, in specific ways," they said. "Rooms, corridors, even ideas embedded into architecture." Arlen listened carefully. "When something like you passes through," the instructor continued, "those sections begin to question whether they are still what they were." A distant shift echoed through the atrium, something structural realigning, not breaking, reinterpreting itself. The instructor's expression changed slightly. "That is happening faster than expected," they said quietly. Arlen's voice dropped. "So what happens to me?" The instructor looked at him directly now. "That depends," they said. A pause. "On whether the academy accepts you or corrects itself around you." The words settled heavily. Arlen felt a strange realization forming. He wasn't just being observed. He was being measured. And the academy was deciding whether he belonged inside its version of reality. Behind them, the atrium shifted again, more noticeably this time. A bridge above subtly reconnected to a different tower than before. A wall's texture changed. A corridor that had been open a moment ago now existed in a different orientation entirely. The academy was actively rewriting itself. Around him, the instructor took a step back. "This is escalating," they said quietly. Arlen looked up. "What do I do?" The instructor hesitated, then answered honestly, "Try not to be remembered incorrectly." Before Arlen could ask what that meant, the instructor turned and walked away, not quickly, but decisively. Like staying near him too long would also change something they were trying to preserve. Arlen stood alone in the shifting atrium, and for the first time, he understood a terrifying possibility. It wasn't that he was learning the academy. It was that the academy was struggling to remain itself because of him, and somewhere deep inside its structure, something had begun to correct that imbalance, quietly, patiently. Arlen did not move for a moment after the instructor left. The atrium around him continued its quiet instability, like a living system trying to re-establish balance after an unexpected disturbance. Walls shifted their alignments slightly. Bridges corrected their angles. Lanterns resynchronized their floating paths. Everything looked normal again within seconds. But it wasn't normal. It was corrected. And Arlen could feel the difference. He took a slow step forward. Immediately, the space around him adjusted. Not dramatically, subtly. A corridor that should have been open ahead of him was now angled away. A staircase that once led upward now looped into another direction entirely. Even the sound of footsteps nearby seemed to avoid crossing too close to him. It wasn't blocking him. It was rerouting reality around him. Arlen swallowed. "This place is reacting to me," he whispered. And for the first time, he realized something more unsettling. It wasn't just reacting, it was adapting. He continued walking carefully through the atrium. Students passed by, but their attention was different now. Not curious, not distracted, selective. Some avoided looking at him completely. Others glanced briefly, then looked away too quickly, as if their attention had been gently redirected elsewhere, as if something in their perception had decided he was not important enough to fully register, or too important to fully process. A soft chime echoed through the structure. Once, then again, the atrium stilled slightly. Arlen noticed the shift immediately. The air felt denser, like the academy had entered a new operational state. He stopped. The sound was familiar now. Not a warning, a system response. A voice emerged, not from above or around him, but from the architecture itself. Divergence detected. Arlen froze. The words were calm, clinical, not emotional. A second voice followed. Stability index decreasing in localized regions. Another pause. Subject remains unclassified. Arlen took a step back instinctively. "What is this?" he said aloud. No one answered him directly, but the academy responded anyway. The light patterns above subtly changed. The corridors realigned again, and somewhere deeper inside the structure, something shifted its attention fully toward him. Then it happened. A section of the atrium behind Arlen stopped existing. Not collapsed, not destroyed, simply removed from relevance. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. Students who had been standing there a second before were now walking elsewhere, as if they had always been on different paths. Arlen stared at the space. "What just happened?" he murmured. A new voice spoke. "Closer. This is correction." Arlen turned sharply. The older instructor stood a short distance away again. Their expression was no longer calm. It was measured, carefully controlled. When something within the academy introduces inconsistency, the instructor said, "The system attempts to restore coherence." Arlen frowned. "By erasing parts of it?" The instructor corrected him immediately. "By rewriting what those parts were supposed to be." A pause. "You are not being erased, Arlen." A heavier pause. "You are being redistributed." Arlen felt a chill. That doesn't make sense. The instructor nodded slightly. "It doesn't need to make sense," they said. "It only needs to stabilize." The atrium shifted again, this time more noticeably. Arlen saw it clearly now. Sections of architecture near him were being adjusted in real time, not destroyed, but reassigned. A corridor he had just passed through now led somewhere different for other students. A stairway that once looped upward now served a completely different route entirely. It was as if the academy was editing itself to remove contradictions, and he was the contradiction. "You are forcing the academy to choose versions of itself," the instructor said quietly, "and it is not designed to hold uncertainty in that way." Arlen's voice tightened. "So what happens to me when it finishes choosing?" The instructor hesitated for the first time, then answered honestly, "That depends on whether you can be integrated into a single version of you." The words hit harder than Arlen expected. "Single version?" he repeated. The instructor nodded once. "You are not consistent inside the academy's structure," they said. "Your presence creates branching interpretations." A pause. "And the system does not like branches that do not converge." Arlen looked down at his hands again. They looked the same, but now he wasn't sure what same even meant here. Everything around him was constantly adjusting to maintain consistency, except him. A sudden pulse moved through the atrium, stronger this time. Students nearby stopped again. Not slowly, instantly, like the entire environment had entered a synchronized alert state. The instructor looked upward slightly, then spoke quietly. "It has escalated." Arlen followed their gaze. What has? The instructor did not answer immediately. Instead, the air around them darkened slightly, not visually, but conceptually, like attention had shifted to a deeper layer of the academy. Then the instructor finally spoke. The core systems are observing you directly now. Arlen felt his stomach tighten. Core systems? The instructor nodded. The parts of the academy that do not interact with students. A pause. They interact with structure. The atrium went still. Completely. Even the floating lanterns stopped moving. Even sound felt suspended. Arlen realized something terrifying. He was no longer being observed by people. He was being evaluated by something that defined what people and place even meant here. A faint vibration passed through the floor. Not physical, structural, like reality adjusting a decision. The instructor stepped slightly closer. Their voice lowered. There is something you need to understand, they said. Arlen listened carefully. This academy does not reject students easily. A pause. It corrects them into compatibility. Arlen's breathing slowed. And if I can't be corrected? The instructor looked at him for a long moment, then answered. Then the academy will begin to ask whether you are the error, or the observer of the error. A silence followed. Heavy, meaningful, and somewhere deeper in the academy, something responded to that question. Not aloud, but structurally, like the question itself had been registered. Arlen felt it, a shift, not in the room, in everything around it. The academy had stopped treating him as an anomaly, and had started treating him as a system-level uncertainty. The instructor took a step back. This is no longer a classroom-level issue, they said quietly. Arlen looked up. Then what is it? The instructor hesitated, then answered in a way that made Arlen's chest tighten. It is deciding whether you belong to the academy, a pause, or whether the academy belongs to you. The moment the instructor finished speaking, the atrium changed in a way Arlen could feel more than see. It wasn't another structural shift like before. It was deeper, like the entire academy had briefly stopped pretending it was just a building. Arlen felt it in his chest first, a faint pressure, as if attention itself had weight and had just settled on him, not from one direction, from everywhere. The floating lanterns above froze completely, not dimmed, not flickered, frozen, as if time had been asked to pause and was considering whether to comply. Even the distant movement of students across bridges seemed to slow into near stillness. And then the voice returned. But this time, it wasn't localized. It was the environment itself speaking. Core observation initiated. Arlen's throat tightened. The instructor beside him did not move, did not interrupt, did not explain. That silence alone told Arlen more than words could. A second layer of awareness pressed into the space. It felt like the academy was no longer looking at him as a person. It was examining him as a condition, something that affected everything around it. Arlen took a slow step backward. Immediately, the space adjusted, not to block him, but to maintain alignment. His movement created a ripple of recalculation through the atrium, paths subtly reoriented, distances between structures recalibrated. Even sound distribution shifted to maintain balance. It was as if every action he took required the academy to rewrite a small portion of itself. What is happening? Arlen whispered. The instructor finally spoke, but their voice was quieter now. Core observation means the academy is no longer responding through local systems, they said. It is now being assessed at structural depth. Arlen frowned. By what? The instructor hesitated, then answered carefully. By what it is built to obey. The air grew heavier, not physically, conceptually, as if rules were being rewritten in real time, just beneath perception. Arlen felt something new, not a presence behind him, not around him, above everything. Not watching like eyes, but evaluating like logic. The atrium shifted again, but this time it wasn't reactive. It was declarative. A faint geometric pattern appeared across the floor, spreading outward in slow, precise lines. Not decoration, Not magic. Classification. The academy was mapping him. Arlen stepped back again. The pattern followed. Not chasing. Extending. As if wherever he might stand next had already been calculated. The instructor spoke again, more urgently now. Do not resist its alignment attempts, they said. Arlen looked at them sharply. Alignment with what? The instructor's eyes narrowed slightly. With the version of reality that excludes contradiction. A sudden shift rippled through the space, and Arlen saw it clearly this time. For a fraction of a second, the atrium around him appeared in two states at once. In one, everything was normal. In the other, everything had been simplified, smoothed, adjusted. And in that version, Arlen was not standing where he was now. He was somewhere else entirely. His breath caught. What was that? He asked. The instructor answered immediately. That was correction attempting final convergence. A pause. And failing. The word failing echoed differently than everything else. Not like error, like resistance. The core observation voice returned again. Instability persists. A pause. Subject resists singular classification. Another pause. Recalibration required. The atrium darkened slightly. Not visually, structurally, as if the academy had entered a deeper operational layer. Arlen felt something shift behind his awareness. Not a sound, not a presence, a decision forming, slowly, collectively. The instructor took a small step closer to him. Their voice lowered further. Arlen, they said, listen carefully. He looked at them. This level of observation does not happen unless the academy cannot predict the outcome of a subject. Arlen swallowed. So what does that mean for me? The instructor hesitated, then answered. It means you are no longer inside the lesson. A pause. You are inside a test the academy does not know how to finish. The atrium pulsed once, a deep, resonant shift. And then, the architecture began to subtly simplify, not collapse, not break, reduce variability. Edges became cleaner, paths more direct, movements more predictable. Everything around Arlen began aligning toward a single coherent version, a controlled version, a stable version, and Arlen understood something deeply unsettling. The academy was not trying to destroy him. It was trying to decide which version of reality would continue existing around him. The instructor's voice dropped almost to a whisper. This is the point where most anomalies resolve, they said. Arlen looked at them. And if I don't? The instructor didn't answer immediately. Then finally, then the system escalates beyond observation. A pause. And begins enforcement. The word hung in the air. Enforcement. Not punishment. Not correction. Finalization. The atrium lights dimmed again. But this time, they didn't return. The space remained in a controlled, reduced state. Everything too complex. Slowly disappearing. Arlen took a step back instinctively. The geometry followed again. Not aggressively. Inevitably. And then, from somewhere deeper in the academy, a new signal appeared. Not a voice. Not a sound. A directive. Simple. Cold. Absolute. Resolve subject inconsistency. Arlen felt the weight of it immediately. The academy was no longer observing him. It was attempting to conclude him. The directive did not echo. It settled, like gravity increasing by an invisible degree that only Arlen could feel. Resolve subject inconsistency. The words did not repeat, yet they stayed present everywhere at once, embedded into the structure of the atrium itself. For the first time since arriving at Eldermore Academy, Arlen understood something with uncomfortable clarity. This was no longer observation. It was execution of logic. The atrium changed again, but this time it did not simplify gently. It stabilized. Every unstable element around him resolved into one fixed configuration. Bridges locked into final positions. Lanterns stopped drifting entirely. Even the distant movement of students froze into predefined paths, as if their freedom of motion had been narrowed into strict possibility lines. The world was becoming singular. Arlen stepped back instinctively. The space did not follow him this time. It anticipated him. Wherever he might have moved next, was already accounted for, already adjusted into the system. There were no surprises left for the academy, except him. The instructor beside him spoke quickly now. "This is enforcement layer activation," they said. Arlen turned. "What does that mean?" The instructor's expression was no longer calm. It was focused, carefully restrained urgency. "It means the academy has stopped attempting to understand you," they said, and started attempting to resolve you. A low vibration passed through the floor. Not physical, structural, the kind of shift that happens when a system stops experimenting and starts committing. From above the atrium, the lanterns began to descend, slowly, perfectly aligned. They were no longer decorative lights. Now they looked like instruments, each one calibrating the space below. Arlen took another step back. The moment he did, the environment reacted, not by blocking him, by narrowing possibility. A corridor behind him subtly sealed itself into a different version of architecture that did not allow backward movement. He was not being trapped. He was being guided toward conclusion. "This is bad," Arlen whispered. The instructor nodded once. "Yes," they said, "because enforcement assumes uncertainty is an error to eliminate." A pause. "And you are still uncertain." The air tightened, not physically compressing, conceptually narrowing, like the academy was reducing the number of valid interpretations of Arlen's existence. Then it appeared, not through a door, not from a direction, but as if space itself decided it needed a focal point. A tall structure formed in the center of the atrium. Smooth, perfect, mathematically precise. No ornamentation, no inconsistency. It looked less like something built and more like something defined into existence. Arlen felt his breath catch. "What is that?" he asked. The instructor did not look away from it. "An enforcement node," they said quietly. A pause. "It finalizes unstable subjects." The node emitted a soft pulse. Immediately, the atrium responded. All remaining flexibility in the environment disappeared. Everything locked into a single coherent state. Even Arlen's sense of movement felt slightly delayed, as if his actions were being processed before they fully happened. Arlen turned sharply toward the instructor. "Can I leave?" he asked. The instructor hesitated, then answered honestly. "Not through standard pathways." A pause. "Those no longer exist around you." Arlen's heart rate increased. He looked around quickly. Every corridor he could see now was aligned toward the node. Every path converged. The academy was no longer offering options, only direction. The node emitted another pulse, this one stronger. The air around Arlen shimmered slightly, and then he saw it, not physically, but structurally. A representation of himself being mapped into the system, not his body. His consistency, his predictability, his alignment to the academy's internal logic. The instructor stepped closer to him. "There is still one option," they said quietly. Arlen looked at them. "What?" A pause. "Disengage from being observed." Arlen frowned. "How do I do that?" The instructor hesitated, then answered carefully. "You stop responding to the system as a coherent subject." A pause. "You become unresolvable." Before Arlen could ask what that meant, the node emitted a third pulse, and this time, the academy responded instantly. The atrium shifted into enforcement mode, not visually, ontologically. Reality simplified further, edges sharpened. Movement became linear. Even thoughts felt slightly constrained, as if drifting too far from structure would trigger correction. Arlen felt it clearly now. The academy was trying to reduce him into something it could complete, a fixed state, a final definition. He took a step backward again. The space anticipated it, but something unexpected happened. His movement did not fully align with the system's prediction. A tiny deviation occurred, barely noticeable, but enough. The node paused, just for a fraction of a second, then recalculated. The instructor's eyes widened slightly. "You just introduced variance," they said. Arlen looked at them. "I don't know what that means." The instructor's voice dropped. "It means the system had to update its understanding of you." A pause, and it did not like the result. The atrium dimmed, not visually, prioritization-wise. Something deeper had begun to escalate. A new voice entered. Not the academy, not the instructor. Something above both. Enforcement escalation required. The node responded immediately. Its surface split into structured layers of light, each layer representing a version of Arlen being evaluated for resolution. Arlen stepped back again. But this time, the environment did not just follow, it tightened. The space around him began to reduce variation aggressively. Paths disappeared faster. Possibilities collapsed sooner. The academy was accelerating convergence. The instructor grabbed his attention sharply. Now, they said. Arlen turned. This is the point where subjects either integrate or disappear from structural memory. A pause. You need to stop being predictable to it. Arlen's breathing quickened. How do I do that? The instructor looked at him directly. For the first time, they said, do not try to understand what the academy expects next. A pause. Act without reference. The node emitted another pulse. Stronger. Closer. And for the first time, Arlen realized the academy wasn't chasing him. It was predicting him and winning. The instruction lingered in Arlen's mind like a spark that refused to settle. Act without reference. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Everything inside him wanted to predict the next moment, to understand the rules of what was happening, to find structure in the chaos of the enforcement layer tightening around him. But structure was exactly what the academy was using against him. The enforcement node pulsed again. This time, the atrium did not just stabilize, it refined. Edges of space sharpened so precisely that the environment felt almost mathematical. Movement pathways narrowed into single intended directions. Even hesitation began to feel like something the system could register and correct. The academy was no longer guessing Arlen. It was constraining him. Now, the instructor said sharply. Arlen didn't ask what to do. He moved, not toward a direction, not toward a plan, just away from the idea of being predictable. He stepped sideways, then backward, then forward again, but not in any logical sequence. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the system reacted, not with force, with confusion. The node flickered, just slightly. A subtle instability rippled through its structure. The atrium paused, not fully, but enough to feel like reality had missed a beat. The instructor's eyes widened. You broke sequence alignment, they said quietly. Arlen frowned. I don't know what I did. The instructor nodded. That's why it worked. The enforcement layer recalculated. The space around Arlen attempted to re-establish predictability, but something had changed. He was no longer fully inside the system's expectation model. He had become partially unresolvable. The node emitted a stronger pulse. But this time, the response was delayed. Not immediate. Not perfect. Arlen felt it. A gap. A space in the system's certainty. Not large, but real. And it was centered on him. What is happening? He asked. The instructor spoke carefully now. The academy predicts based on coherence patterns, they said. Everything inside it is supposed to behave in ways that can be mapped. A pause. You just stopped behaving like a complete pattern. Arlen looked at his hands again, still the same. But now he understood something deeper. It wasn't about what he was. It was about what he allowed the system to assume he would be next. The node shifted again, but instead of tightening the environment, it hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. For the first time since enforcement began, the system was not fully certain how to proceed. Arlen took another step. Not planned, not calculated, just chosen in the moment without reference to outcome. The node reacted slower this time. The atrium lagged behind him by a fraction of a second. A delay, a cracking prediction. The instructor spoke urgently. Keep doing that, they said. Arlen glanced at them. Doing what? Not matching expectation. The air around them shimmered again. But instead of collapsing into a single stable configuration, it branched. Multiple potential versions of the atrium appeared briefly at once. One where Arlen was standing still, one where he was moving backward, one where he was already gone. The system struggled. For the first time, the node emitted a distorted pulse. Not clean, not precise. The structure around it flickered between states. Arlen felt something strange, a lightness. Like the Academy was losing certainty about his position within it. And without certainty, enforcement weakened. "You're destabilizing the observation model," the instructor said. Arlen looked at them. "Is that good?" A pause. The instructor nodded slowly. "For you," they said. "Yes." The node attempted another recalibration. But this time, the correction was incomplete. A portion of the atrium remained unsynchronized, and Arlen stood within that unsynchronized portion, partially outside enforcement, partially inside. The Academy had encountered something it did not fully resolve. Not error, not anomaly. Unresolvable behavior. The instructor stepped closer. "This is rare," they said quietly. Arlen swallowed. "What happens now?" The instructor looked at the node, then back at him. "Now," they said, "the Academy has to decide something it hasn't had to decide before." A pause. Whether to adapt around you or isolate you completely. The node pulsed again, but slower, more uncertain, like a system thinking for the first time instead of executing. Arlen stood in the unstable space. For the first time since arriving at Eldermore Academy, he was not fully defined by it, and that meant something far more dangerous than enforcement had begun. Not correction, not alignment, decision. The atrium no longer felt like a place. It felt like a question that had stopped waiting for an answer. Arlen stood in the unstable zone he had unintentionally created, surrounded by a reality that could no longer fully agree on what he was. One moment he was clearly there, the next slightly misaligned, as if the Academy's certainty about his position kept slipping. The enforcement node hovered at the center of the atrium, but its presence was different now. No longer absolute, no longer certain. It pulsed again, but the rhythm was fractured, like a system struggling to maintain authority over something it could not fully categorize. The instructor stood beside Arlen, silent for a long moment. Then they spoke carefully. "It has reached the final evaluation stage." Arlen didn't look away from the node. "Final?" The instructor nodded. "Yes," they said. "The Academy must decide whether you are an anomaly to be corrected, or a variable to be incorporated." A pause, and there is no third option. The atrium dimmed, not as a visual effect, as a reduction in interpretability. Everything became simpler again, but not stable, like the system was stripping away complexity to make a final judgment easier to compute. The floating lanterns stopped entirely. The bridges locked into place. Even distant corridors ceased shifting. The Academy had entered decision mode. Arlen felt it clearly now. The pressure was no longer just observation. It was consensus. Something vast beneath the Academy, deeper than instructors, deeper than systems, was gathering interpretation of him into a single outcome. The node spoke, not as sound, as conclusion forming into structure. Subject remains inconsistent. A pause. Resolution required. Another pause. Select pathway. And then Arlen saw it. The atrium split. Not physically, conceptually. Two overlapping versions of reality appeared around him. One was clean, stable, predictable. In that version, Arlen stood still, integrated, accepted into the Academy's structure as a defined entity. The other version was unstable, expanding, unfinished. In that version, Arlen remained what he was now, shifting, unresolvable, beyond full classification. But the cost of that version was immediate. The Academy would not remain the same around him. It would continue to fragment in his presence. The instructor watched both versions carefully. "This is the decision space," they said quietly. Arlen whispered, "I didn't ask for any of this." The instructor looked at him. "No one here does," they replied. The node pulsed, waiting, not forcing, deciding whether it needed to force at all. Arlen took a slow breath. For the first time, he stopped trying to understand the academy, stopped trying to interpret its rules, stopped trying to become something it could stabilize. He just existed, without reference, without prediction, without alignment. And something changed. Not in the academy, in the node. It hesitated. The instructor's eyes widened slightly. It's responding to lack of definition, they said. Arlen frowned. What does that mean? The instructor answered softly. It means it cannot finalize you if you refuse to become final. The atrium trembled, not violently, but structurally, as if the entire system had encountered a contradiction. It could not compress into a single outcome. The node emitted one last sequence of pulses, faster, then slower, then irregular, and then silence. For the first time since enforcement began, the Academy did not respond immediately. The decision process had stalled, not failed, stalled. Arlen looked around. Nothing was collapsing. Nothing was stabilizing. Instead, the Academy was doing something far more unusual. It was adapting in real time, trying to find a way to include him without forcing him into a single definition. The instructor exhaled slowly. It has never done this before, they said. Arlen looked at them. What is it doing? The instructor answered carefully. Learning how to hold contradiction without resolving it. A pause. And you are the reason it is attempting that. The node dimmed slightly, not shutting down, changing state. The atrium no longer felt like it was trying to correct Arlen. It felt like it was trying to understand how to exist with him inside it. The instructor stepped back slightly. This is not a victory, they said quietly. Arlen looked at them. Then what is it? The instructor's expression softened. It is coexistence. In progress, the space around Arlen loosened. The enforcement pressure was gone, but so was certainty. He was no longer being corrected, but he was also no longer fully defined by anything around him. The Academy remained, but it had changed. Not broken, not fixed, changed in structure, because something inside it had learned a new rule. Not everything must resolve to exist. Arlen took a step forward. This time, the space did not resist, but it also did not fully predict him. It simply allowed. The instructor watched him go. You will still be monitored, they said quietly. Arlen didn't turn around. I figured, he replied. A pause, but not controlled, the instructor added. Arlen stopped briefly, then nodded once, and continued walking. Behind him, the enforcement node slowly dissolved into ambient structure again. Not gone, but integrated into a new configuration of the Academy. A system that now contained something it could not fully define. And somewhere deep within Eldermore Academy, beyond corridors, beyond chambers, beyond observation layers, the Academy itself registered a final realization. Not as words, not as sound, but as understanding. Some students are not meant to be corrected. Some are meant to change what correction means. Arlen walked on, and for the first time since arriving, the Academy did not try to decide what he was. It simply made space for him to continue becoming. Rain whispered softly against the windows of Baker Street. The fire crackled in the grate, filling the sitting room with a warm orange glow that danced gently across the walls. Outside, London slept beneath a curtain of mist and midnight rain. The streets were nearly empty, except for the occasional carriage rolling slowly through the wet darkness. Inside 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat quietly in his armchair. He was not reading, not speaking, not playing the violin. Instead, he simply watched the fire. Dr. Watson sat nearby with a blanket over his knees and a book resting unopened in his lap. The comforting silence of the room felt heavier than words tonight. It was the kind of silence only close friends could share. Holmes finally lifted his eyes toward the rain-covered window. "Do you hear it, Watson?" "The rain?" Watson asked softly. No, Holmes replied. London itself. Watson smiled faintly. I believe London is asleep. Holmes leaned back in his chair. That is where you are mistaken. London never truly sleeps. Even now, somewhere in the fog, someone is making a terrible mistake. The fire cracked softly between them. Watson had learned long ago that Holmes often spoke this way late at night. His mind wandered through mysteries the same way other men wandered through dreams. Outside, thunder rolled far away over the city rooftops. Mrs. Hudson climbed the stairs slowly and entered with a tray of tea. You two gentlemen ought to sleep eventually, she said kindly. Holmes accepted the tea without looking away from the window. Sleep is useful, he murmured, but curiosity is often stronger. Mrs. Hudson sighed warmly. You'll work yourself into the grave one day, Mr. Holmes. That would at least be an interesting experiment. Watson chuckled quietly while Mrs. Hudson shook her head and disappeared downstairs once again. For several minutes, only the rain could be heard. Then, a knock. 3 slow knocks echoed through Baker Street. Watson looked toward the door immediately. At this hour? Holmes smiled faintly. Exactly. The detective rose smoothly from his chair and crossed the room. His long shadow stretched across the carpet as lightning briefly illuminated the windows. Another knock came, this one weaker than before. Holmes opened the door. Standing there was a young woman, wearing a dark traveling coat soaked with rainwater. Her breathing was uneven, and her pale hands trembled slightly beneath wet gloves. But it was not fear alone, Holmes noticed. It was exhaustion. Please, she whispered. I was told you help people. Holmes stepped aside instantly. Come in. Watson quickly stood and pulled another chair closer to the fire while Mrs. Hudson hurried upstairs again after hearing voices. The young woman removed her gloves carefully. Her fingers were cold from the rain. My name is Eleanor Vale, she said softly. Holmes observed her silently. Watson noticed that familiar distant look in Holmes's eyes, the expression that appeared whenever. His mind began assembling invisible pieces together. You traveled from the countryside, Holmes said calmly. Miss Vale blinked in surprise. Yes. By train? Yes. You have not slept in at least 2 nights. She stared at him. How could you possibly know that? Holmes sat down slowly across from her. Mud from Sussex remains on your boots despite London rain. Your ticket stub protrudes from your coat pocket, and your hands shake not from cold alone, but fatigue. Watson smiled slightly. Even after all these years, Holmes still amazed him. Miss Vale lowered her eyes toward the fire. I apologize for arriving so late. Night, Holmes replied, is when the truth often arrives. The room fell quiet again. Rain drifted gently against the windows. Finally, Holmes spoke. You are afraid of someone. Miss Vale looked toward the door, as though expecting someone to appear there. Yes. A man? She hesitated. I do not know. Holmes leaned forward slightly. Then begin at the beginning. The firelight flickered across her face as she gathered courage. My uncle owns Blackthorn Manor near the coast, she said quietly. At least he did. Holmes exchanged a quick glance with Watson. Did? Watson repeated. Miss Vale nodded slowly. He disappeared 3 weeks ago. Thunder rumbled softly outside. He vanished from inside the manor itself, she continued. The doors were locked. The servants heard nothing. And yet by morning, he was gone. Watson leaned forward. No trace at all? None. Holmes closed his eyes briefly. A classic impossibility, he murmured. Miss Vale swallowed nervously. At first we believed he had left secretly. But then strange things began happening inside the house. The flames shifted softly in the fireplace. "What sort of things?" Holmes asked. "Footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening at night, candles extinguishing themselves." Watson listened carefully while Holmes remained perfectly still. "And yesterday," she whispered, "someone played the piano." Holmes opened his eyes again. "Someone?" There was no one there. The room grew quieter than before. Even the rain seemed distant now. Watson noticed Holmes studying every detail of her expression. Holmes cared little for ghost stories, but he cared deeply about fear. Fear revealed truths people could not hide. "You believe your uncle is dead," Holmes said gently. Miss Vale looked into the fire. "I believe something terrible remains inside that house." Lightning flashed again beyond Baker Street. Holmes suddenly stood. Watson sighed softly. He recognized that look immediately. The adventure had already begun. Holmes moved toward the violin resting near the fireplace and lightly touched its strings. "When do we leave, Watson?" Watson smiled tiredly. "I had a feeling you would say that." Miss Vale stared at them in disbelief. "You mean you'll come?" Holmes turned toward the rain-covered windows of London. "Miss Vale," he said quietly, "nothing is more dangerous than a mystery, hidden inside an old house during a storm." A faint smile crossed his face. "And therefore, nothing could possibly interest me more." Outside, rain continued falling across sleeping London. Far away, beyond the city and beyond the dark countryside roads, Blackthorn Manor waited silently beside the sea, and somewhere inside its endless corridors, someone was still awake. Morning arrived slowly over London. The rain had not stopped during the night. Gray clouds drifted low above the city rooftops, while thin streams of water slid endlessly down the windows of Baker Street. Inside 221B, the fire still burned warmly. Watson awoke to the smell of fresh tea and the soft sound of violin music. Sherlock Holmes stood beside the window, playing quietly, while pale morning light filled the room. The melody was calm and distant, almost dreamlike, blending perfectly with the sound of rain outside. "You did not sleep at all," Watson said sleepily. Holmes continued playing for several seconds before lowering the violin. "Sleep," Holmes replied, "seemed less interesting than thought." Watson sat up slowly. "You've already solved the mystery in your head, haven't you?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not solved, only awakened." On the table beside him lay several handwritten notes, a railway timetable, and a rough sketch of Blackthorn Manor drawn from Miss Vale's description. Watson walked closer. "You've been working all night." Holmes poured tea calmly. Our visitor omitted certain details intentionally. "You believe she is hiding something?" "Everyone hides something, Watson. The question is whether the secret matters." Thunder rolled softly far away. Miss Eleanor Vale entered the sitting room shortly afterward, dressed now in dry traveling, clothes provided by Mrs. Hudson. Though she appeared more rested, shadows still lingered beneath her eyes. "You truly intend to visit the manor?" she asked carefully. Holmes buttoned his long dark coat. "We leave within the hour." Miss Vale looked uncertain. "You should understand something before we go." Holmes waited silently. "The servants believe the house is cursed." Watson raised an eyebrow. "And what do you believe?" She hesitated near the fireplace. "I believe fear changes people." Holmes nodded slightly. "A far more reliable danger than ghosts." By late morning, the three travelers departed Baker Street beneath steady rain. The streets of London glistened, darkly beneath carriage wheels and Gaslight reflections. Shopkeepers opened slowly for the day-while newspaper. Boys shouted headlines through the dank fog. Holmes remained unusually quiet during the journey to the station. Watson noticed the detective observing everything. A muddy boot print near a bookstore. A nervous man standing beneath an umbrella. A torn theater poster moving in the wind. Nothing escaped Holmes's attention. At the railway station, steam rose heavily around the platforms. Conductors shouted. Destinations while travelers hurried through clouds of white, smoke and rain. Miss Vale clutched her ticket tightly. "You've been to Blackthorn before?" Watson asked. "Many times as a child," she answered softly. "But after my parents died, my uncle became different." Holmes looked toward her. "In what way?" "He grew secretive, quiet. The manner itself changed." The train whistle echoed loudly through the station. "What do you mean?" Watson asked. Miss Vale lowered her voice. "He closed entire sections of the house. Servants were forbidden from entering the West Wing after dark." Holmes's eyes sharpened slightly. "Interesting. And sometimes," she continued carefully, "he would disappear for hours into the cliffs beneath the manor." Watson exchanged another glance with Holmes. "The cliffs?" Watson repeated. "There are sea caves below Blackthorn," she explained. "Very old caves. Smugglers supposedly used them years ago." Holmes smiled faintly. Now the shape of the puzzle begins to appear. The train journey lasted several hours. Rain followed them across the countryside. Outside the windows, London slowly vanished behind rolling hills, forests darkened by mist, and lonely villages sleeping beneath grey skies. Inside the compartment, warmth and the steady rhythm of the train created a peaceful stillness. Watson eventually drifted half asleep, while Holmes remained awake, staring thoughtfully through the glass. Miss Vale spoke softly after a long silence. "My uncle was not a cruel man." Holmes did not look away from the window. "But he became frightened near the end." Watson opened his eyes again. "Frightened of what?" She shook her head slowly. "I never knew." Holmes finally turned toward her. "Did he ever mention a name?" Miss Vale hesitated. "Once." "What name?" Her voice became barely louder than the rain. "Morcant." The compartment grew silent. Even Watson felt something cold move through the air at the sound of the unfamiliar name. Holmes repeated it quietly. "Morcant." "He spoke it only once," she whispered. "Late at night. I heard him arguing with someone in his study." "With whom?" Watson asked. "I don't know. But after that evening, he locked himself inside the manor for days." Holmes leaned back thoughtfully. "A name connected to fear," he murmured. "Those are rarely meaningless." The train continued through the storm. By evening, the countryside had become wild and empty. The sea occasionally appeared beyond the hills, dark, endless, and restless beneath the storm clouds. Finally, the train slowed near a tiny coastal station, Blackthorn Crossing. Only a single lantern burned beside the platform. The station master looked surprised to see passengers arriving so late. "You're heading to the manor?" the old man asked nervously. Miss Vale nodded. The station master frowned deeply. "Bad place these days." Holmes adjusted his gloves calmly. "Because of the disappearance?" The old man stepped closer. "Because strange things walk there at night." Watson almost smiled, expecting Holmes to dismiss the comment immediately. Instead, Holmes simply asked, "What sort of things?" The station master looked toward the dark coastline beyond the station, lights beneath the cliffs, footsteps near the sea, and sometimes He lowered his voice. Music. Miss Vale became pale again. The piano, she whispered. A cold wind swept across the platform. Far away, thunder rolled over the ocean. A carriage waited nearby to take them to the manor. The driver barely spoke during the journey. Narrow roads twisted through wet forests and lonely hills, while rain struck the carriage roof endlessly above them. Then Watson first saw it, Blackthorn Manor. It stood atop the cliffs overlooking the sea like a shadow carved from stone itself. Tall windows glimmered faintly in the storm. Towers rose into the mist, while black waves crashed violently far below, against the rocks. The house seemed ancient. Watching, waiting, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the manor for only a moment before darkness returned. Miss Vale whispered quietly, "We're here." As the carriage approached the iron gates, Watson noticed something strange immediately. One window near the upper west wing glowed faintly with candlelight. Holmes noticed it too. "You said most of the house is empty," he said calmly. Miss Vale stared upward in confusion. "It is." Another flash of lightning revealed the window again. The candlelight disappeared instantly. Holmes smiled very slightly. "Excellent," he murmured. Watson sighed softly. Whenever Holmes said excellent, danger was usually very close. The gates opened slowly with a long metallic groan, and Blackthorn Manor welcomed them inside. The carriage rolled slowly through the iron gates of Blackthorn Manor. Rain drifted across the long stone pathway, like silver smoke beneath the lantern light. Dark trees bent in the coastal wind, their branches scratching softly against one another, like whispering hands. Watson looked up at the enormous manor as they approached. The house seemed even larger from nearby. Its windows rose high above them, some glowing warmly, others completely dark. Ivy climbed across ancient stone walls, and narrow towers disappeared into mist above the cliffs. Far below, hidden somewhere beyond the darkness, the sea crashed endlessly against the rocks. The carriage finally stopped beneath a covered entrance. Before anyone could knock, the heavy front doors opened slowly inward. An elderly butler stood waiting. He was tall, thin, and perfectly still. "Miss Vale," he said quietly, bowing his head. "Good evening, Mr. Finch," Eleanor replied. The butler's eyes moved carefully toward Holmes and Watson. "These gentlemen are here to investigate my uncle's disappearance." For just a moment, Watson noticed something unusual. Not surprise, fear. Butler Finch stepped aside silently. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor." The entrance hall was vast and dimly lit by candlelight. Portraits of long-dead family members watched silently from the walls, while shadows trembled softly across the ceiling from the flames below. A massive grandfather clock ticked somewhere deeper inside the house. Slow, heavy, almost alive. The air smelled faintly of old wood, smoke, and sea salt carried upward from the cliffs. Holmes removed his gloves carefully while studying the hall. Watson recognized that expression again. Holmes was listening, not merely hearing sounds, listening to the house itself. "How many servants remain?" Holmes asked calmly. "Only 4, Finch replied. "Most left after the incident." "The incident," Holmes repeated softly. Finch hesitated. "Your rooms are prepared upstairs." Holmes smiled faintly. "Avoiding questions rarely destroys them, Mr. Finch." The butler lowered his eyes briefly. "Dinner is waiting in the dining room." Without another word, he disappeared down the corridor. Watson exhaled slowly. "Well," he muttered, "he seems cheerful." Miss Vale almost smiled despite herself. "He was loyal to my uncle for 30 years. Holmes walked slowly across the hall. Loyalty, he murmured, often survives longer than truth. Lightning flashed outside the tall windows. For one brief second, the entire entrance hall illuminated in cold white light, and Watson noticed something strange. A portrait near the staircase had been turned toward the wall. "Holmes," Watson whispered. The detective followed his gaze immediately. Without hesitation, Holmes crossed the hall and carefully turned the portrait around. It revealed the painting of a stern, middle-aged man with sharp eyes and silver hair. Miss Vale inhaled sharply. "My uncle." The painted face seemed strangely lifelike in the candlelight. Watson noticed scratches along the wooden frame. Holmes noticed them too. "Recently moved," Holmes observed. "Why would someone turn it around?" Watson asked. No one answered immediately. Then Miss Vale spoke quietly. "Because some of the servants believe his eyes move at night." Thunder rolled deeply across the sea. Watson gave a small, nervous laugh. Holmes did not. Instead, he leaned closer to the portrait. "Interesting." "What is?" Watson asked. Holmes lightly touched the frame. "Dust." Watson frowned. "What about it?" "The dust beneath the frame is undisturbed." Miss Vale looked confused. "What does that mean?" Holmes stepped back slowly. "It means this portrait was not turned by fear." The room grew silent. "It was turned," Holmes continued, "by someone searching for something behind it." Watson blinked. "Behind the portrait?" Holmes carefully lifted the painting from the wall. Behind it, hidden within the stone, was a small iron safe. Miss Vale stared in shock. "I never knew that existed." Holmes examined the lock briefly. "Recently opened." "How can you tell?" "Scratches near the keyhole." Watson folded his arms. "So what was inside?" Holmes smiled slightly. "That, Watson, is precisely the correct question." Before anyone could continue, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. A woman entered carrying candles. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair. "The housekeeper," Miss Vale explained. "Mrs. Dunley." The woman nodded politely, though uneasily, toward Holmes and Watson. "You've arrived during unpleasant weather," she said softly. "The weather suits the house," Holmes replied. Mrs. Dunley looked away immediately. Watson noticed it again. Fear. Everyone in Blackthorn Manor seemed afraid of something they refused to name. Dinner passed quietly. The dining room was enormous, but only a tiny section near the fireplace remained, lit. Rain tapped gently against tall windows while distant. Thunder rolled over the sea. Holmes ate little. Instead, he asked questions. "When was Mr. Vale last seen?" Finch answered carefully. 3 weeks ago. Near midnight. Alone?" "Yes." "Was he behaving strangely?" A pause. "More strangely than usual?" Holmes leaned back slightly. "Elaborate." The butler exchanged a nervous glance with Mrs. Dunley. Finally, the housekeeper spoke. "He believed someone was entering the manor at night." Watson frowned. "A thief?" "No," she whispered. "Someone from the past." The fire crackled softly. Holmes's eyes sharpened slightly. "And did anyone actually see this person?" Mrs. Dunley swallowed. "No." "But they heard things?" She nodded slowly. Footsteps in the west wing. At those words, even Finch became visibly uncomfortable. Holmes noticed immediately. "You disapprove of discussing that part of the house." The butler stared into the fire. "The west wing has remained closed since Master Vale disappeared." "Locked?" Holmes asked. "Yes." Holmes set down his teacup. Excellent. Watson sighed quietly. Again that word. Excellent. Hours later, the storm worsened. Wind struck the manor walls, while the sea roared beneath the cliffs below. Most of the servants retired early, leaving only Holmes, Watson, and Eleanor beside the fading fire in the library. The library itself felt ancient. Thousands of books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, while candlelight flickered across dark wooden shelves. Holmes wandered slowly through the room, studying titles: history, navigation, chemistry, ancient coastal maps. Then Holmes suddenly stopped. One section of bookshelves stood strangely empty. A rectangular gap remained, where several books had recently been removed. What belonged here? Holmes asked. Miss Vale approached slowly. My uncle's journals. And where are they now? I don't know. Holmes crouched slightly near the shelf. What are you doing? Watson asked. Holmes pointed downward. Tiny grains of sand rested near the bookshelf base. Not ordinary dust. Wet sand. Sea sand. Watson stared. Someone brought this from the shore. Recently, Holmes replied. Lightning flashed violently outside. And then a sound. Soft, distant, a piano. The melody drifted faintly through the manor corridors. Slow notes. Beautiful. Sad. Miss Vale became pale instantly. That's impossible. Watson stood immediately. The piano room? The West Wing, she whispered. Holmes was already moving. Without hesitation, he took a candle lantern from the table and stepped into the dark corridor beyond the library. The piano continued somewhere far ahead, one lonely melody echoing through the sleeping manor. Watson hurried beside Holmes, while Eleanor followed nervously behind. The corridors grew darker as they entered the older parts of the house. Portraits stared from the shadows. Floorboards creaked beneath their steps, and always ahead, the piano, soft, waiting. Finally, they reached a tall wooden door at the end of a narrow hallway. The music stopped. Complete silence followed. Rain battered the windows nearby. Holmes touched the doorknob slowly. Locked. The West Wing, Eleanor whispered. Holmes listened carefully. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. Only distant thunder. Then Watson noticed something. Light. A thin golden line beneath the door. Someone was inside. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. Very gently he knocked once. No answer. Again, silence. Then, from the other side of the door, came the sound of a single slow footstep. Watson felt coldness move down his spine. Holmes smiled. Not happily, curiously. Finally, he murmured. And the candlelight beneath the door suddenly went out. Darkness settled heavily across the West Wing corridor. Only Holmes's lantern remained lit now, its small golden flame trembling softly, while rain and thunder echoed through. Blackthorn Manor. The line of light beneath the locked door had vanished completely. Yet someone had clearly been inside. Watson stood very still beside Holmes, listening carefully. Nothing. No movement. No breathing. Only the distant roar of the sea below the cliffs. Eleanor Vale wrapped her arms tightly around herself. You heard the footsteps, she whispered. I know I wasn't imagining them. You were not, Holmes replied calmly. He knelt beside the old lock and examined it closely. What do you see? Watson asked quietly. Several things. Holmes lifted the lantern slightly higher. The dust near the hinges has been disturbed recently. The lock itself is old but not unused. Watson frowned. So someone enters this room regularly. Precisely. Eleanor looked toward the dark corridor behind them. But the key disappeared with my uncle. Holmes smiled faintly. Locks rarely stop determined people. Thunder rolled deeply overhead. Holmes removed a narrow metal tool from his coat pocket. Watson sighed softly. You carry lockpicks now? I carry solutions. Within moments, the old lock clicked open. The heavy door creaked inward slowly. Cold air drifted out from the darkness beyond. The room inside was enormous. Dust-covered furniture rested beneath. White sheets, while tall windows overlooked the stormy sea far below. Moonlight occasionally flashed through the rain, illuminating fragments of the room in silver light. At the far end stood a grand piano. Its lid remained open. One candle beside it still released a thin ribbon of smoke, recently extinguished. Holmes crossed the room silently. Watson followed carefully, while Eleanor remained near the doorway, visibly nervous. The detective touched the candlewick lightly. Less than a minute ago. Watson looked around the room. But where did they go? Holmes pointed toward the floor. Fresh footprints, wet footprints. They crossed the wooden floor toward the far wall beside the piano and stopped. Watson stared. There's nowhere else to go. Holmes examined the wall carefully. Old paintings covered the wood, paneling while faded. Wallpaper peeled near the corners. Then Holmes pressed gently against one section beside the fireplace. A soft click echoed through the room. Part of the wall shifted inward. Eleanor gasped quietly. A hidden passage. Holmes lifted the lantern toward the narrow opening, now revealed behind the paneling. Cold air drifted upward from darkness below. Stone steps descended deep beneath the manor. Watson looked toward Holmes. Well, he muttered, this is becoming increasingly cheerful. Holmes stepped toward the staircase immediately. The architecture of fear is often built underground. Watson sighed again and followed. The hidden staircase spiraled downward, through ancient stone walls, damp with sea moisture. Water dripped softly somewhere, below, while the storm outside became more distant with every step. The air smelled of salt and earth. Eleanor remained close behind Watson, holding the lantern tightly. How old is this place? Watson whispered. Parts of the manor date back nearly 200 years, Eleanor answered softly. The passages are older still. Holmes ran his fingers lightly along the wall. Smugglers, he murmured. What? These tunnels once connected the manor to the sea caves. Far below them, a strange sound echoed faintly. Not footsteps, not voices. Waves. The staircase finally opened into a long underground corridor. The ceiling was low and curved from ancient stone. Small lantern hooks lined the walls, though most remained empty now. Only darkness stretched ahead. Holmes crouched briefly near the ground. Recent footprints again, he observed. Watson looked carefully. 2 sets, one larger, one smaller. Eleanor noticed them too. My uncle. Possibly, Holmes replied. They continued deeper underground. The sound of the sea grew louder with every step. Then Holmes suddenly stopped. He raised one hand slightly. Silence. Watson listened carefully. Somewhere ahead, a voice. Soft, almost impossible to hear. Eleanor gripped Watson's arm nervously. Did you hear that? Holmes moved forward slowly. The corridor widened into a massive underground chamber. And there, illuminated by lantern light beside the crashing sea entrance, stood a man. Tall, thin, wearing a long dark coat. His back faced them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The storm outside sent flashes of lightning through the cave entrance, briefly illuminating the stranger in pale white light. Then Holmes spoke calmly. Good evening. The man froze. Slowly, he turned toward them. Watson immediately noticed his face was pale and deeply tired. Gray streaks crossed his dark hair, while sharp eyes studied Holmes carefully. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Uncle? The man stared at her silently, then toward Holmes. You should not have come here, he said quietly. Watson blinked in surprise. Richard Vale was alive. Holmes remained perfectly calm. People rarely disappear without reason, Holmes replied. Richard Vale looked toward the sea beyond the cave entrance. The house is no longer safe. Eleanor stepped forward emotionally. We thought you were dead. For a time, her uncle answered softly. I almost wished I was. Thunder shook the cave violently. Holmes studied the man carefully. You were hiding. Yes. From whom? Richard Vale hesitated, then slowly spoke one word. Morkant. The cave suddenly felt colder. Watson stepped closer. Who is Morkant? But Richard Vale did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked behind them toward the tunnel darkness. Fear appeared in his eyes. Real fear. Holmes noticed it instantly. Someone followed us? Holmes asked quietly. Richard Vale lowered his voice. He's already inside the manor. A sudden sound echoed through the tunnels behind them. A door slamming somewhere far above. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Coming closer through the underground corridor. Eleanor turned pale. Watson instinctively reached for his revolver. Holmes did not move. The footsteps continued approaching from the darkness. One step, then another. Measured, patient, as though whoever walked toward them knew there was no need to hurry. The lantern light flickered softly against the cave walls. Richard Vale whispered, "You must leave now." But Holmes only smiled faintly into the darkness ahead. "No," he said quietly. "I think our mystery has finally arrived." And somewhere within the shadows of the underground passage, someone laughed softly. The laughter echoed softly through the underground tunnel. Not loud, not wild. It was calm laughter, controlled, the kind of laughter that belonged to someone who enjoyed patience. Watson tightened his grip on the revolver, hidden beneath his coat, while Eleanor Vale stepped backward toward her uncle. Only Sherlock Holmes remained perfectly still. The lantern flame trembled gently in the cold cave air. Again the footsteps approached, slow, precise. Then, from the darkness of the tunnel, a figure emerged, tall and slender. A dark overcoat dripped with rainwater, while shadows concealed most of his face beneath the brim of a black hat. For several seconds no one spoke. The sea crashed violently behind them beyond the cave entrance, but inside the chamber, the silence felt far louder. Then the stranger removed his gloves carefully. "Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "I hoped London's weather might keep you occupied." His voice was smooth and strangely elegant. Holmes smiled faintly. "And yet here I am." The man's eyes moved calmly toward Watson. "Dr. Watson, loyal as always." Watson frowned immediately. "You know us?" The stranger ignored the question. Instead, he looked toward Richard Vale. "You disappoint me." Richard Vale's face became pale. "I gave you everything you wanted." "Not everything," the man replied. Eleanor whispered nervously, "Uncle, who is he?" Richard closed his eyes briefly before answering. "Sebastian Morkant." Lightning flashed beyond the cave entrance. For a single moment, Watson saw Morkant's face clearly. Sharp features, cold gray eyes, a faint scar near his left cheek. But what disturbed Watson most was not the man's appearance. It was his calmness. Morkant seemed completely comfortable, standing inside darkness beside the sea during a storm while facing Sherlock Holmes himself. That required either courage or madness, possibly both. Holmes took one slow step forward. "You have caused considerable fear inside Blackthorn Manor." Morkant smiled slightly. "Fear already lived there long before I arrived." The cave air felt colder now. Water dripped softly from the ceiling, while distant thunder rolled endlessly across the sea outside. Watson watched Holmes carefully. Whenever Holmes met someone truly dangerous, his voice became quieter rather than louder. "You orchestrated Richard Vale's disappearance," Holmes said calmly. "Incorrect," Morkant replied. "Mr. Vale disappeared willingly." Richard looked toward the floor. Holmes noticed immediately. "So you were hiding from someone else?" Morkant's smile faded slightly. "Excellent, Mr. Holmes." Eleanor looked between them in confusion. "I don't understand any of this." Richard finally stepped forward. "Years ago," he said quietly, "I made a terrible mistake." The lantern flame flickered again. "I became involved with certain men who operated along the coast." "Smugglers," Watson guessed. Richard nodded slowly. At first it seemed harmless. Ships arrived at night. Goods passed quietly through the caves beneath the manor. Morkant folded his hands calmly behind his back. Your uncle possessed useful property. Richard continued speaking, though shame filled his voice now. But eventually, I realized they were transporting more than stolen goods. Holmes's eyes sharpened. What else? Richard swallowed heavily. Documents, government records, military information. Watson stared. Spies? Morkant smiled faintly again. Such an ugly word. Holmes remained motionless. And you attempted to leave? Richard nodded. I told them I wanted no further involvement. What happened then? Watson asked. Richard looked directly at Morkant. He said nobody leaves. Thunder shook the cave violently overhead. Eleanor looked horrified. You never told me any of this. I was trying to protect you. Morkant sighed almost sadly. Protection is often merely delayed truth. Holmes walked slowly across the chamber now, observing every detail. The crates stacked near the cave wall, the fresh boot prints, the lantern oil, the hidden boat tied near the sea entrance. Nothing escaped him. You continued using the tunnels after Richard Vale vanished, Holmes observed. Yes, to retrieve something hidden inside the manor. Morkant's expression changed slightly, only slightly, but Watson noticed. Holmes had touched the truth. The missing journals, Holmes continued softly. Richard suddenly looked alarmed. Holmes! But the detective already understood. The journals contain names, Holmes said. Transactions, routes, evidence. Morkant's silence confirmed everything. Watson finally understood why Richard Vale had hidden underground rather than flee completely. If the journals reach the authorities, Watson began. Many powerful men become vulnerable, Holmes finished. The sea roared against the cliffs outside. Morkant slowly removed his hat and brushed rainwater from the brim. You are remarkably intelligent, Mr. Holmes. I've heard that before. And yet intelligence often creates unfortunate complications. Watson noticed several things at once. Morkant's right hand had disappeared inside his coat. Richard Vale looked terrified. And Holmes looked almost relaxed. Then Holmes suddenly spoke. The revolver is unnecessary. Watson blinked. Morkant paused. Slowly he smiled again. You saw it? The shape beneath your coat was obvious. Morkant laughed softly. Amazing, but predictable, Holmes replied. For a long moment neither man moved. Then a new sound echoed through the tunnels behind them. Running footsteps, multiple footsteps. Finch the butler suddenly appeared from the darkness, carrying another lantern. Behind him came Mrs. Dunley and two frightened servants. Master Vale, Finch cried in relief. Richard stared in surprise. You came after me? Of course we did, the old butler replied emotionally. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Manor, Watson saw warmth return briefly to Richard Vale's face. But Morkant did not appear pleased. His eyes shifted carefully toward the cave entrance behind him, calculating, searching for escape. Holmes noticed immediately. You cannot leave by boat, Holmes said calmly. Morkant raised an eyebrow. And why not? Because the tide is rising. Almost as if responding to Holmes's words, a massive wave crashed against the cave entrance. Seawater surged violently across the lower rocks. The small boat tied beside the entrance struck the stone wall hard. Again and again. Morkant's expression darkened slightly. Holmes continued quietly. Within 20 minutes, the tunnel exits near the shore will flood completely. Watson smiled faintly. Holmes had trapped him, or so it seemed. But then Morkant began laughing again. Not nervously, not desperately, confidently. That would concern me greatly, he said softly. If I intended to escape through the sea. Watson felt sudden coldness move through him. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. There is another passage. Morkant bowed his head slightly. Excellent, Mr. Holmes. Before anyone could react, The lantern nearest the tunnel suddenly shattered. Darkness exploded across the chamber. Eleanor screamed softly. Watson reached instantly for Holmes in the blackness, while the sound of running. Footsteps echoed wildly through the cave. Then, a hidden stone door slammed somewhere nearby. Silence returned. Only the crashing sea remained. Finch relit another lantern with shaking hands. The chamber glowed dimly once more. Morcant was gone. Holmes stood motionless near the center of the cave, staring toward the stone wall. Watson exhaled sharply. How did he disappear that quickly? Holmes touched the wall carefully. Architecture, he murmured. Then his fingers stopped against the stone. Another hidden mechanism. Another secret passage. Eleanor looked terrified again. He's inside the manor. Holmes nodded slowly. Yes. Thunder rolled over the sea once more. And now, Holmes said quietly, the game truly begins. Far above them, somewhere inside the endless corridors of Blackthorn Manor, a door creaked open. The hidden stone door remained slightly open. Cold air drifted from the darkness beyond it, carrying with it the faint smell of old wood, seawater, and something else. Smoke. Sherlock Holmes lifted the lantern higher. Morcant knows the manor better than we assumed, he said quietly. Richard Vale looked exhausted. There are passages beneath almost every part of Blackthorn. My grandfather expanded them years ago, during the smuggling era. Watson frowned. And you never thought this information important to mention earlier? Richard lowered his eyes. I was ashamed. Holmes glanced toward him briefly. Shame is frequently less useful than honesty. Then the detective stepped into the hidden passage without hesitation. The narrow corridor climbed upward through rough stone walls. Tiny streams of water slid down. The rocks, while distant, thunder echoed faintly above them. Behind Holmes came Watson, Eleanor, Richard, Finch, and the servants carrying lanterns that painted trembling, shadows across the tunnel walls. The atmosphere felt dreamlike, ancient, as though the manor itself were alive around them. Watson spoke softly while they climbed. Do you think Morcant intends to retrieve the journals tonight? Yes. And if he succeeds? Holmes's expression remained calm. Then Blackthorn Manor becomes the graveyard of many truths. The tunnel twisted upward several more minutes before ending behind a hidden wooden panel. Holmes pressed gently. The panel opened inward. They had entered the manor once more, but not the west wing. This room was smaller, dusty, unused for years. Old furniture rested beneath white sheets, while cobwebs covered the corners like silver thread. Rain tapped gently against narrow windows nearby. Watson recognized the sound immediately. They were back above ground. Finch looked around nervously. This was once the music room. Holmes studied the floor carefully. Fresh footprints crossed the dust toward the hallway. Morcant had passed through recently. The group moved quietly into the corridor beyond. Blackthorn Manor felt different at night. The endless hallways stretched through darkness like silent rivers. Candle flames flickered softly in distant sconces, while every floorboard creak sounded unnaturally loud. Far away, somewhere deeper in the house, a grandfather clock began striking midnight. One heavy note at a time. Dong, dong, dong. The sound echoed endlessly through the manor. Eleanor whispered, I hate this house at night. Holmes looked toward the dark staircase ahead. Houses do not create fear, he said softly. People do. Lightning flashed outside. For one brief moment, the corridor illuminated completely, and Watson saw something at the far end of the hallway. A figure, standing motionless beside the staircase. Then darkness returned. Watson stopped immediately. Holmes. The detective had already seen it. The lantern light trembled slightly as Holmes walked forward, slowly, carefully. The others followed behind in silence. When they reached the staircase, nobody was there. Only shadows, only silence. Watson frowned. I know what I saw. Yes, Holmes replied calmly. So do I. Eleanor looked frightened again. Could it have been Morcant? Holmes crouched near the staircase railing. No? He pointed toward the floor. Dust remained untouched. No footprints. No disturbance at all. Watson stared. Then how? Holmes stood again. An optical illusion created by lightning, shadows, and expectation. Watson sighed quietly. You remove mystery from everything. Holmes almost smiled. On the contrary, Watson, I merely remove false mystery. A sudden sound interrupted them. Somewhere upstairs, a door slammed violently. Everyone froze. Then came running footsteps overhead. Fast. Desperate. Finch turned pale. The library! Without another word, Holmes hurried toward the main staircase. The others followed quickly, through the dim corridors while thunder shook the windows around them. When they reached the library entrance, the door stood partially open. Inside, wind blew through shattered windows, rain scattered across the carpet, and books lay everywhere across the floor. Someone had searched the room violently. Holmes entered immediately. The bookshelves near the missing journals now stood almost completely empty. Drawers had been opened, cabinets overturned. Watson looked around carefully. Morcant was here. Yes, Holmes said quietly. But he did not find what he wanted. Eleanor moved toward the fireplace. My uncle hid the journals somewhere else. Richard nodded slowly. I moved them after realizing Morcant intended to return. Holmes turned toward him sharply. Where? Richard hesitated. Then thunder flashed again, and suddenly, the lights went out. Every candle in the library extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed the room completely. Eleanor gasped softly. The storm outside roared louder than ever. Watson heard movement nearby, someone crossing the room, fast. Holmes? Watson called quietly. No answer. Only darkness. Then, a voice beside him, very close. Do not move. It was Holmes. Calm as always. Watson listened carefully. Another sound now emerged from the darkness. Breathing. Not theirs. Someone else remained inside the library with them. The rain battered the broken windows while lightning flickered occasionally through the storm outside, illuminating fragments of the room for less than a second each time. Flash. Bookshelves. Darkness. Flash. The fireplace. Darkness. Flash. A figure near the doorway. Then gone again. Eleanor whispered fearfully. He's here. Holmes's voice remained quiet. No, he wants us to believe that. Watson heard Holmes moving slowly through the darkness. Then came the sound of a match striking. A tiny flame appeared. Holmes relit one candle calmly. The library returned slowly to view. Everyone remained present. Everyone except Richard Vale. Eleanor looked around in panic. Uncle? No answer. Finch hurried toward the hallway. He couldn't have gone far, but Holmes suddenly raised a hand. Wait. The detective stared toward the fireplace. Watson followed his gaze. Something had changed. One of the carved wooden panels beside the fireplace now stood slightly open, a hidden passage. Holmes walked toward it slowly. On the floor beside the opening rested something small and silver. Watson picked it up carefully. A pocket watch. Richard Vale's pocket watch. Still warm. Eleanor became pale. He took him. Holmes examined the hidden doorway carefully. No? Watson looked confused. What do you mean? Holmes pointed downward. Only one set of footprints entered the passage. Richard's. He went willingly. The storm outside intensified again. Wind howled through the broken windows, while somewhere deep inside Blackthorn Manor, a piano began playing once more. Soft, slow, waiting. Holmes stared into the darkness of the hidden passage. Then he spoke quietly. At last. Watson looked toward him. At last what? Holmes's eyes reflected the candlelight strangely. At last Richard Vale has decided to tell the truth. And from somewhere far below the manor came the sound of a scream. The scream echoed through Blackthorn Manor like a ghost carried by the storm. Then silence returned. Heavy, endless. Only the rain continued tapping against the shattered library windows, while the distant piano melody drifted faintly through the darkness below. Eleanor Vale covered her mouth in fear. That was my uncle. Holmes remained perfectly calm, though Watson noticed his eyes sharpen immediately. "No," Holmes said quietly. "What?" Watson asked. The voice was wrong. Eleanor stared at him. "You can tell that from one screen?" Holmes picked up the candle lantern from the table. "Yes." The detective moved toward the hidden passage beside the fireplace. The scream was intended to create panic. Watson sighed softly. "And naturally you refuse to panic." "Panic," Holmes replied, "is merely confusion in motion." The narrow passage beyond the fireplace smelled strongly of damp stone and smoke. Ancient wooden beams supported the ceiling, while cold drafts moved softly through unseen cracks in the walls. The piano music continued somewhere below them. One lonely melody repeated again and again. Slow, beautiful, unsettling. Eleanor whispered nervously. "That was my mother's song." Holmes glanced toward her. "Interesting. She used to play it when I was a child." Watson frowned. "Then who's playing it now?" Nobody answered. The hidden stairway descended deeper beneath, the manner than the earlier. Tunnels connected to the sea caves. These passages felt older, secretive, built not for smuggling but for hiding. The air grew colder as they continued downward. Finally, the stairs opened into a circular stone chamber. Several candles already burned there, and seated calmly beside an old wooden table was Richard Vale, alive, unharmed. Watson stopped immediately. Eleanor rushed forward. "Uncle?" Richard stood slowly. His face looked exhausted, but calmer now somehow. Holmes entered the chamber silently, studying every detail at once. The room contained shelves of old documents, maps, and locked boxes. Dust covered most surfaces except one section near the table where papers had clearly been examined recently. And on the table itself rested several black leather journals, the missing journals. Holmes's eyes settled briefly on them. "Ah," he murmured. Richard looked toward Holmes quietly. "I knew eventually you would find this room." Watson folded his arms. "You might have spared us several terrifying hours by explaining things earlier." Richard gave a tired smile. "I no longer knew whom to trust." Holmes walked slowly around the chamber. "But now you do." Richard nodded once. "Yes." The piano music had stopped. Only the storm above remained now. Holmes picked up one of the journals carefully and opened it. Pages filled with names, dates, payments, shipping routes. Watson immediately understood the danger of the information. This could expose half the smuggling operations on the coast. "Far more than smuggling," Holmes replied softly, while turning another page. Eleanor looked confused. "What do you mean?" Holmes held up one entry. "These are coded transfers of government documents." Richard sat heavily in a chair nearby. "Morkant works for powerful men." "How powerful?" Watson asked. Richard looked into the candlelight silently for several moments before answering. "Powerful enough to erase people." The room became very quiet. Even Holmes stopped turning pages. Richard continued softly. "When I first joined their operations, I believed it was only smuggling luxury goods. But eventually I learned the truth." "What truth?" Eleanor whispered. Richard closed his eyes briefly. "They sell secrets." Thunder rolled faintly overhead. Holmes examined another page carefully. "These journals contain every transaction?" "Yes." "Names included?" "Most of them." Watson looked toward the hidden chamber entrance nervously. "Then Morkant will never stop hunting them." Richard nodded slowly. "That is why I disappeared." Eleanor sat beside him. "You should have told me. I was trying to protect you, but instead you terrified everyone." Richard lowered his eyes again. "Yes." Holmes closed the journal gently. "There remains one problem. Watson already knew. Morkant." Holmes nodded. "He still believes the journals can be recovered." Finch stepped forward uneasily. "Should we contact the police?" Holmes remained thoughtful. "Not yet. Watson blinked. Why not? Because Morkant expects that. The detective walked toward the far wall of the chamber, where an old coastal map hung beneath layers of dust. Holmes studied it silently, then smiled faintly. There. Watson approached. What have you found? Holmes pointed toward a section of cliffs north of the manor. Another cave entrance. Richard stood suddenly. That passage collapsed years ago. Holmes shook his head. No, it was sealed intentionally. Richard stared. How can you know that? The stonework differs from the surrounding wall. Eleanor looked confused. What does that mean? Holmes turned toward them. It means Morkant possesses another route into the manor. At that exact moment, a distant bell rang somewhere above them. Once, twice, 3 times. Finch turned pale immediately. The front gate bell. Watson frowned. At this hour, no one moved. Then the bell rang again, slowly, deliberately. Eleanor whispered, "Who could possibly be visiting now?" Holmes's expression darkened slightly. Morkant. Richard shook his head quickly. No, Morkant never announces himself. Precisely, Holmes replied quietly. The detective extinguished one of the candles. Then another. The chamber grew darker. Stay here, Holmes said calmly. Watson immediately stood. You're not going alone. Holmes almost smiled. My dear Watson, I was hoping you'd say that. Together they climbed back through the hidden passages toward the upper floors of Blackthorn Manor while thunder rolled endlessly above them. The manor itself felt strangely silent now. Too silent. Even the grandfather clock had stopped ticking. As they approached the entrance hall, Watson noticed something unusual immediately. The front door stood open. Cold rain blew inside across the marble floor, and directly in the center of the hall rested a single black umbrella. No visitor remained nearby, only the umbrella. Holmes approached slowly, then stopped. Attached to the handle was a folded white note. Watson watched Holmes open it carefully. Inside, written in elegant black ink, were only 6 words. You are looking the wrong way. Watson frowned deeply. What does that mean? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes slowly lifted toward the grand staircase above them. Watson followed his gaze. At the very top of the staircase stood a woman in white, motionless, watching them silently from the shadows. Lightning flashed across the windows, and the woman vanished. The echo of the lightning faded slowly through Blackthorn Manor. For a brief moment, everything had been visible. The grand staircase, the rain-stained windows, and the woman in white. Now there was only darkness again. Watson stepped forward instinctively. I saw her, he said firmly. Holmes did not take his eyes off the staircase. Yes, he replied quietly. So did I. Eleanor Vale looked shaken. That's impossible. No one else lives here. Finch tightened his grip on the lantern. Servants don't go near the upper floors at night. Holmes began walking toward the stairs. His movements were calm, controlled. Watson followed immediately. Holmes, that wasn't a reflection or an illusion. That was a person. I agree. Watson paused for half a second. You agree too easily. Holmes almost smiled. I reserve disagreement for uncertain matters. They reached the base of the staircase. The air here felt colder, heavier, as though the house itself had begun to change its behavior. Holmes examined the steps carefully. Dust lay undisturbed. No fresh footprints. Yet the image remained vivid in all their minds. A woman in white, standing perfectly still, watching them. Watson whispered, "Where did she go?" Holmes slowly raised the lantern. Upstairs. Eleanor shook her head quickly. There are no safe rooms up there anymore. They're all locked. Holmes turned toward her. Then we will unlock them. They climbed, step by step. The manor felt different on the upper floor. The walls were older here, lined with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. Portraits of ancestors hung crookedly, their eyes following every movement in the dim lantern light. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked open by itself. Watson stopped. Did you hear that? Holmes nodded. Yes. Finch swallowed nervously. This house never used to be like this. Holmes replied softly. It still isn't. They moved forward again. The corridor ahead split into two directions. Left, the west wing. Right, the older family rooms. Holmes chose neither immediately. Instead, he knelt and studied the floor. Watson sighed. Please tell me you're not looking at dust again. Holmes pointed. Footprints. Eleanor stepped closer. I don't see anything. Exactly, Holmes said. Watson frowned. What do you mean exactly? Holmes stood. The woman in white did not walk here. Silence followed. Then Watson slowly understood. You mean she wasn't real? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked down the corridor. No, he said finally. I mean, she did not need to walk. A faint draft moved through the hallway, and somewhere far above them, a door closed softly. Click. Eleanor whispered. She's still here. Holmes continued forward. Or someone wants us to believe she is. They entered the West Wing corridor again, the same place where everything had begun. The air felt tighter now, more oppressive. The candlelight flickered constantly, as though struggling against something unseen. Watson spoke quietly. If Morkant is inside the manor, why use illusions? Holmes replied, to separate us. From what? Holmes stopped in front of a large double door. Each other. Behind them, Finch suddenly spoke. Mr. Holmes, look. He pointed back toward the corridor they had just walked through. The hallway was empty, but the lantern light behind them had changed. Dimmer, flickering, and further down the corridor stood a figure. White dress, motionless. Watson spun immediately. There. But when they all turned, the figure was gone again. Holmes didn't move. Instead, he studied the door in front of them. This is where he wants us to be. Watson frowned. Morkant? Holmes nodded slightly. Yes. Eleanor stepped closer. Inside that room? Holmes placed his hand on the door handle. Yes. Finch looked alarmed. Then we should leave. Holmes shook his head. No? He opened the door. Inside was a long-forgotten gallery. High ceilings, covered paintings, heavy curtains blocking most of the moonlight, and at the far end, a single candle burning. Watson stepped in cautiously. Why is there a light here? Holmes moved forward slowly. Because someone wants to be seen. Eleanor followed, gripping her coat tightly. The room felt different from the rest of the manor. Still, too still. Then Watson noticed something strange. The paintings. Every portrait along the walls had their eyes scratched out. Every single one. He frowned deeply. Why would anyone do this? Holmes looked at them briefly. Fear. Suddenly, a soft clap echoed through the room. Once, slow, deliberate. Holmes turned toward the sound immediately. From the shadows near the far end of the gallery, Sebastian Morkant stepped forward. He was smiling, calm, completely at ease. I must admit, Morkant said softly, you have been more persistent than expected. Watson immediately raised his revolver. Don't move. Morkant didn't even glance at him. Instead, he looked at Holmes. You followed every trail I left for you. Holmes replied calmly. Not every trail, only the intentional ones. Morkant smiled. Of course. Eleanor stepped forward. You've ruined this house. Morkant tilted his head slightly. This house was already ruined. Holmes took one step closer. Where is Richard Vale? Morkant's smile widened slightly. He is safe. Safe? Watson repeated sharply. Yes, Morkant replied, where he cannot interfere. Holmes studied him carefully. And the journals? Morkant's eyes flickered briefly. Still negotiable. Watson tightened his grip on the revolver. Holmes remained completely calm. Then he said something unexpected. You never intended to leave Blackthorn Manor. Morkant paused. Holmes continued. You needed us here. Silence. Then Morkan slowly applauded. Very good, Mr. Holmes. Watson frowned. Why would he want that? Holmes didn't look away from Morkant. Because the real transaction is not in London. Morkant's smile faded slightly. Holmes continued. It is here. He pointed downward. Beneath the manor. Beneath the caves. Beneath everything. Watson's expression changed. You mean, something is hidden under all of this? Holmes nodded once. The final ledger. Morkant exhaled slowly. You are very close now. The candle at the end of the room flickered violently. And then, a slow sound came from behind them. Footsteps. Multiple. Watson turned immediately. Finch, Eleanor, and several servants had entered the gallery behind them. But something was wrong. Their expressions were blank. Empty. Like sleepwalkers. Eleanor whispered, "What's happening to them?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. Morkant has already begun the final phase. Watson looked at Holmes. What phase? Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he spoke quietly. Everyone stepped back. But it was too late. The servants moved forward slowly. Toward Holmes. Toward Watson. Toward Eleanor. And Morkant smiled softly in the candlelight. This is where it ends, Mr. Holmes. The gallery doors slowly closed behind them. Click. And the room fell into complete silence. The gallery doors clicked shut behind them, a soft final sound. Not loud enough to be dramatic, but loud enough to feel irreversible. The candle at the far end of the room flickered once, then steadied. Sebastian Morkant stood in its glow like a man who no longer needed to hide. Around him, the servants of Blackthorn Manor moved slowly forward, not running, not attacking. Just walking. Their faces were calm, empty, almost peaceful, like people moving through a dream they could not wake from. Watson lowered his revolver slightly. This isn't normal, he whispered. Holmes's voice remained quiet. No, it is controlled. Eleanor Vale stepped backward instinctively. Controlled by what? Holmes did not take his eyes off Morkant. Suggestion. Morkant smiled faintly. Ah. The famous Sherlock Holmes reduces everything to logic again. Holmes replied calmly. Logic is simply what remains when manipulation is removed. One of the servants stepped closer, then another. Finch's lantern swayed gently in his hand, his expression distant, unfocused. Watson frowned deeply. They're not attacking us. They're just walking. Holmes nodded slightly. As I said, suggestion. Morkant tilted his head. You notice everything, Mr. Holmes, but you rarely notice timing. Holmes finally looked at him directly. Timing of what? Morkant's smile returned. Of awakening. The word hung in the air. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, a distant sound echoed through the manor. A bell. Slow. Once, then again. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. That bell... Holmes turned slightly. The front gate. Watson frowned. But we're inside already. Morkant raised one hand gently. And now the final guests arrive. The servants stopped moving. All at once. Perfect synchronization. Watson felt a chill move through him. What did you do to them? Morkant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly between them. Blackthorn Manor was built with many purposes, he said calmly. Smuggling, secrets, storage. He stopped near Holmes. But above all, Morkant leaned slightly closer. Control. Holmes studied him. You are not the owner of this system. Morkant smiled softly. No, I am its current operator. A faint sound echoed again. Footsteps. Not inside the gallery. Outside. Above them. Many footsteps. Holmes's expression changed slightly. Watson noticed immediately. What is it? Holmes spoke quietly. More people are arriving. Eleanor looked confused. Who? Holmes turned toward the gallery windows. Authorities. Finch suddenly blinked as if waking from a trance. Wait, what? One of the servants staggered slightly. Then another. The blank expressions began to fade. Morkan's smile tightened. Holmes continued calmly. You underestimated one variable. Morkan narrowed his eyes. And what is that? Holmes answered simply. Richard Vale. A distant crash echoed through the manor above them, doors being forced open, voices shouting, then footsteps running through corridors. Watson's eyes widened. The police. Holmes nodded. Called before we entered the caves. Eleanor turned sharply toward Holmes. You planned this? I adapted. Morkan's expression darkened slightly for the first time. That is not possible. Holmes stepped forward slightly. You assumed I would follow only what I could see. A second crash echoed above. Closer now. Morkan's calm finally fractured just a little. You think you have won? Holmes replied, I think you have lost control. For a moment, silence returned. Then Morkan slowly exhaled and smiled again. No, Mr. Holmes. He stepped backward into the candlelight. You have simply reached the second layer. Watson frowned. The second layer? Morkan looked toward the ceiling, and suddenly, a low mechanical sound echoed through the manor. Clicking, turning, somewhere deep beneath them. Holmes's eyes sharpened instantly. Eleanor whispered, What is that sound? Holmes spoke slowly. Mechanisms. The servants in the room now stood fully awake again, confused, disoriented. Finch looked around in panic. What happened to me? Watson grabbed his arm. You were hypnotized, or something like it. Morkan laughed softly. Oh no. He shook his head. Not hypnotized. He gestured toward the floor. Conditioned. Holmes took a slow step forward. You embedded triggers within the manor structure itself. Morkan nodded approvingly. Every corridor, every sound, every candle flame. Watson looked horrified. That's impossible. Yet here we are, Morkan replied. A deep vibration passed through the floor. Louder now. The manor itself seemed to be waking up. Holmes turned sharply. Everyone out of the gallery. Eleanor hesitated. What about you? Holmes didn't look back. I will follow. Watson immediately pushed the others toward the door, but Morkan raised a hand. No one leaves yet. The doors slammed shut again, this time not naturally. Mechanically, bolted. Watson turned sharply. They're locked again. Holmes looked up toward the ceiling, and for the first time, Watson saw something unusual in his expression. Recognition. Holmes murmured, So that is it. Morkan smiled. You see it now. Holmes nodded slowly. The manor is not just a building. Morkan replied softly. It is a system. The mechanical sounds below grew louder, closer, like gears turning beneath stone. Watson felt the floor vibrate slightly under his feet. What is happening under us? Holmes answered quietly. The final mechanism is activating. Eleanor whispered. Final mechanism? Holmes looked at her. The entire manor is designed to collapse access. Morkan nodded. If necessary. Watson stared at him. You would destroy this place? Morkan replied calmly. I would preserve what is hidden. Holmes stepped forward again. And Richard Vale? A pause. Then Morkan smiled. He is already where he needs to be. A distant shout echoed above the manor. Then another. The police had entered. Holmes exhaled slowly. Watson. Yes? Holmes turned slightly. We must move now. Watson nodded immediately, but before they could act, the floor beneath them trembled violently, and a section of the gallery floor began to slide open, slowly, revealing darkness below. Deep, endless. Cold air rose from beneath Blackthorn Manor, like a breath from something long asleep. Morkan stood at the edge of the opening and smiled one last time. Welcome to the Foundation, Mr. Holmes. And then the floor gave way. The floor collapsed without warning. Not violently at first, almost gently, like a decision the house had been waiting a long time to make. Then everything gave way at once. Stone, wood, candlelight, footsteps. All of it dropped into darkness beneath Blackthorn Manor. Watson fell hard, the air knocked out of his lungs. His hand scraped against cold stone as he rolled to a stop on a sloped surface that led deeper underground. Above him, he heard shouting. Eleanor, Finch, then Holmes's voice, steady, controlled. Stay where you are. A moment later, silence swallowed the upper world as the broken gallery disappeared from view. Only darkness remained below. Watson slowly pushed himself up. Holmes? He called out. A faint light flickered nearby. Holmes's lantern. Then Holmes himself appeared, climbing carefully down a fractured stone ledge. I'm here, Holmes said calmly. Watson exhaled in relief. Eleanor Vale and the others had also survived the fall, scattered along the uneven stone floor below. But Sebastian Morcant was already standing further ahead, waiting, as if he had expected this outcome. Well, Morcant said quietly, brushing dust from his coat. We are finally underground. The air was different here, heavier, older. The walls were carved stone, reinforced with iron beams and ancient masonry. Pipes ran along the ceiling, some still faintly vibrating with the mechanical sound they had heard earlier. Watson looked around. This isn't a cellar. Holmes nodded. No, this is structural. Eleanor whispered. The foundation? Holmes replied softly. Yes. Morcant smiled faintly. Blackthorn Manor is not merely built on rock, Mr. Holmes. He gestured around them. It is built around something. A low mechanical hum echoed through the tunnels. Louder now, rhythmic, alive. Holmes walked forward slowly, examining the walls. What is this place? Watson asked. Holmes answered without looking back. A control system. Watson frowned. For what? Holmes finally stopped. For everything above us. The realization settled heavily. Even Watson went silent. Eleanor looked shaken. You're saying the manor controls people? Morcant stepped closer. It guides them. Holmes shook his head slightly. Conditioning architecture, sound cues, light patterns, corridor repetition, psychological mapping. Watson stared. You're describing a machine. Holmes nodded. Yes. Morcant applauded softly. Very good, Mr. Holmes. You always see structure before meaning. Holmes turned toward him. Richard Vale is here. Morcant's expression softened. Of course. He stepped aside. Behind him, a narrow passage opened into a large subterranean chamber. And there, Richard. Vale stood beside a massive circular mechanism embedded into the stone floor. It was old, older than the manor itself. Iron rings rotated slowly around a central core, driven by unseen forces. Pipes carried water, steam, and something else Watson could not identify. Richard looked exhausted but conscious. Holmes, he said quietly. Watson moved forward immediately. You're alive. Richard nodded. They didn't harm me. Morcant added calmly. Because he is essential. Holmes studied the mechanism. This is what you are protecting. Richard hesitated. Yes. Holmes turned slightly. The journals were never the real objective. Richard nodded slowly. They are just proof. Eleanor stepped closer. Proof of what? Richard took a breath. Of what this system does. The machine hummed louder. Holmes walked around it slowly. And what does it do? Richard lowered his voice. It influences decisions above ground. Subtle suggestions, pressure points, economic direction. Information flow through the coast. Watson stared in disbelief. You're saying a machine underground is influencing people in London? Holmes replied quietly. Not a machine alone. He looked at Morcant. A network. Morcant smiled. Now you understand. Holmes's expression remained calm. I understand your intent. And? Holmes stepped closer. You are trying to maintain control of it. Morcant nodded. Yes. Watson frowned. Control what exactly? Holmes answered simply. Secrets. A deep vibration echoed through the chamber. The mechanism accelerated. Morcant's voice lowered slightly. It is stabilizing now. Holmes looked up sharply. Stabilizing? Richard suddenly stepped forward. No, Holmes, listen. If it stabilizes at this level, the upper system activates full cascade response. Watson turned. What does that mean? Holmes's eyes narrowed. Mass behavioral synchronization. Silence. Even Morkant stopped smiling. Eleanor whispered, "That sounds impossible." Holmes replied, "It is merely engineering applied to psychology." The machine began to glow faintly. Red light pulsed through the iron rings. Watson stepped back instinctively. "We need to shut it down." Morkant shook his head. "You cannot." Holmes turned toward Richard. "There must be a control point." Richard hesitated. "Yes, but it is integrated into the core chamber." Holmes looked toward the center of the machine. "And where is that?" Richard slowly raised his hand. "Below us." A deeper section of the floor slid open slightly, revealing a spiral descent into complete darkness beneath the mechanism, the true foundation. Holmes did not hesitate. He turned to Watson. "We go down." Watson exhaled sharply. "Of course we do." Eleanor stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." Holmes looked at her briefly. "No? But this is not your responsibility." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Richard placed a hand on Holmes's shoulder. "Stop it, Holmes." Holmes looked at him. "I intend to." Watson and Holmes descended first into the final passage. The air grew colder. The sound of the machine above became distant, replaced by a deep, constant vibration beneath the stone. Then they reached the core chamber and stopped. It was vast, a circular underground space lined with rotating mechanical rings, pulsing lights, and ancient carved symbols that Watson did not recognize. In the center stood a single control column, and beside it, Sebastian Morkant, waiting again. Holmes exhaled slowly. "So this is the heart." Morkant nodded. "Yes." Watson raised his revolver. "It ends here." Morkant looked at him calmly. "No, it begins here." Holmes stepped forward. "Explain." Morkant gestured toward the rotating system. "This is not control for domination, Mr. Holmes." He paused. "It is control for stability." Holmes studied him carefully. "Stability for whom?" Morkant's voice lowered. "For everyone." A long silence followed. Then Holmes spoke quietly. "You believe removing free uncertainty improves society?" Morkant nodded. "Yes." Holmes shook his head. "That is not order. It is imprisonment." For the first time, Morkant's calm cracked slightly. "Chaos destroys everything it touches." Holmes replied, "And control destroys what it touches slowly enough that people call it safety." The machine began to shake. Alarms, soft at first, echoed through the chamber. Richard's voice came from above. "It's destabilizing." Watson looked around. "We need to shut it down now." Holmes moved toward the control column. Morkant stepped in front of him. "You cannot stop it without collapsing the entire system." Holmes replied calmly. "Then it collapses." Morkant froze. "You would destroy it?" Holmes's voice remained steady. "I would free it." A long pause. Then Morkant slowly stepped aside. For the first time, Holmes placed his hand on the control column. Watson held his breath. Above them, the machine screamed into motion. The rings spun faster. Light filled the chamber. Holmes closed his eyes briefly. Then, he pulled the mechanism downward. A deep mechanical roar echoed through the entire foundation. Stone fractured. Light exploded outward. The system began collapsing. Watson grabbed Holmes. "Move!" They ran. Back through the tunnels. Back up through the collapsing foundation. Above them, Blackthorn Manor trembled violently. Walls cracked. Ceilings shifted. The entire system releasing decades of hidden control in a single breaking moment. They burst into the upper levels, just as the manor groaned like a living thing in pain. Eleanor, Finch, and the others were already outside. Rain poured across the cliffs. The sea roared below. Behind them, Blackthorn Manor collapsed into silence and stone dust. A final deep rumble echoed across the coastline. Then, stillness. Watson looked at the ruins. "It's over." Holmes stood quietly beside him. Yes, Eleanor stepped forward. What happens now? Holmes looked toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to break over the sea. Now, he said softly, people begin thinking for themselves again. Watson smiled faintly. That sounds dangerous. Holmes almost smiled. Yes. He turned slightly toward Watson, but also necessary. Behind them, the ruins of Blackthorn Manor faded into morning mist, and somewhere far beneath the broken foundation, the last echo of Morkan's system finally fell silent. Rain continued gently over the cliffs. London, far away, was waking up, and for the first time in a long time, it was waking up on its own. Tonight, before we begin, I want you to slow everything down just for a moment. Not your thoughts, not your worries, not the noise of the day. Just everything. Because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is a quiet journey through a winter night, through silence, through loneliness, and through the smallest sparks of light that can appear even in the darkest moments. This is the story of the Little Match Girl, written by Hans Christian Andersen, but told here in a slow, calm, sleep-friendly way. A version made not to rush you, but to gently guide your mind into stillness. Imagine a winter night, not the kind you watch from inside a warm room, but the kind you are in. Snow falling slowly through empty streets, cold air that feels heavier than silence itself, and a small figure walking alone, carrying nothing but a few matches in her hands. No rush, no help nearby, only footsteps fading into the snow. And yet, something strange begins to happen in that quiet darkness. Every time a match is struck, the world changes. Not loudly, not suddenly, but softly, like a dream forming in the mind. Warm rooms appear, soft lights glow. Moments of comfort rise and disappear like breath in cold air. And you will begin to wonder, are these moments real? Or are they something else entirely? Something deeper. Something the mind creates when it longs for warmth, safety, and peace. So before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Let your body settle. Let your breathing slow just a little. There is nowhere you need to go right now. Nothing you need to fix. Just this moment and the story that is about to unfold. Because in the next few minutes, you will walk through that cold winter night with her. You will feel the silence of the streets. You will see the light of each small match. And you might even start to understand what those lights truly mean. Not just in the story, but in yourself. So now, if you are ready, we begin. Tonight, the air is very cold. A quiet winter night has covered the city in soft white snow. The streets are almost empty now, and the sound of the world feels far away, as if everything is slowly falling asleep. Snowflakes drift gently through the air, landing softly on rooftops, on silent roads, and on a small figure walking alone. She walks slowly, carefully. Her steps are light, but uncertain, as if each step takes a little more effort than the last. The little girl. She is wrapped in thin, worn clothes that are not nearly warm enough for a night like this. The cold air moves easily through the fabric, touching her skin like tiny pieces of ice. Her feet are bare. Once she had shoes, but they were far too big, and somewhere along the long walk, they slipped away into the dark streets behind her. Now, her small feet press into the snow, leaving delicate footprints that quickly disappear beneath falling flakes. She carries a bundle of matches in her hands, carefully, gently, as if they are something precious, because they are. She has been trying to sell them all day, but no one stopped. No one noticed. The city was busy, full of movement and noise, people rushing, laughing, talking, and she remained invisible among them. Now the night has come. and the streets are quiet again. The little girl pauses near the corner of a narrow street. She looks up. Windows glow softly above her. Warm light spills gently into the cold darkness, and behind those windows, she can see shadows moving, families, people sitting together. She imagines what it must feel like inside. The warmth, the safety, the soft sound of voices. For a moment, she simply stands there, watching. The snow settles into her hair, melting slowly against her skin. She pulls her arms closer to her body, trying to hold on to what little warmth she has left. A faint wind passes through the street, carrying with it the distant smell of food. Something warm, something comforting. Her stomach tightens quietly. She hasn't eaten much today, but she doesn't complain. She doesn't speak. She simply continues to stand there, small, silent, and alone in the falling snow. The night feels endless, and yet strangely peaceful. The kind of silence that wraps gently around everything, softening even the cold. She looks down at the matches in her hand again. There are still many left. If she goes home without selling them, she does not finish that thought. Instead, she slowly moves toward a small space between two buildings. The wind is softer there, blocked by the narrow walls. It is not warm, but it is quieter, safer. She lowers herself carefully to the ground, curling slightly as she sits, trying to protect herself from the cold stone beneath her. Snow gathers softly around her. Time passes, slowly, quietly. Her breathing becomes softer. The world becomes still. And in that stillness, an idea begins to form, very small, very gentle. She looks at the matches again. Just one, maybe just one would bring a little warmth, just for a moment. She hesitates. Then, slowly, she takes a single match from the bundle. Her fingers tremble slightly from the cold as she holds it close. For a moment, she simply looks at it, a tiny piece of wood. So simple, and yet it holds something powerful. Warmth, light, comfort, something she has not felt for a long time. She moves her hand carefully and strikes the match against the wall beside her. A soft sound, a quiet spark, and then a small flame appears, warm, golden, alive. The light dances gently in the cold air, and for a moment, everything changes. The darkness pulls back. The cold softens. The little girl watches the flame, her eyes reflecting its gentle glow. She brings her hands closer, slowly, carefully, and for the first time that night, she feels warmth. Not much, but enough. Enough to make her close her eyes for just a moment and breathe, softly, calmly, as the flame flickers in the quiet winter night and something begins to change around her. The small flame trembles gently in the cold night air, yet it does not fade. Instead, it grows steadier, as if protecting itself from the wind, as if it understands how much it is needed. The little girl cups her hands around it, carefully shielding the fragile light. And then, something strange begins to happen. The cold stone wall beside her no longer feels so rough. The darkness no longer feels so deep. The tiny flame begins to glow brighter, softer, warmer. Its golden light stretches outward, reaching beyond her hands, touching the space around her. And slowly, very slowly, the world begins to change. The narrow street fades. The cold air softens, and before her, something new begins to appear. At first, it is only a feeling, a gentle warmth against her face, a quiet stillness, different from the silence outside. Then, shapes begin to form, soft lines, faint shadows, and then a fireplace, large and warm, Its flames dance slowly, peacefully, filling the room with a steady, comforting glow. The crackling of burning wood is soft and rhythmic, like a quiet heartbeat in the distance. The little girl's eyes widen slightly. She does not move. She is afraid that if she moves, it will disappear. But it doesn't. The warmth grows stronger. It wraps around her like a soft blanket, gentle and calm. She stretches her hands toward it, slowly, carefully, and this time, the warmth is real. It touches her fingers, her skin, moving through her body in a way she had almost forgotten. Her shoulders relax. Her breath becomes deeper. For a moment, she's no longer cold. She looks around. The space around her is no longer the narrow street. Now she sits in a quiet room. The walls are wooden, warm in color, softly illuminated by the firelight. Shadows move slowly across them, calm and peaceful. There is a chair nearby, soft, comfortable, covered with a thick blanket. The little girl hesitates again, then slowly shifts her body, as if testing the moment. The ground beneath her no longer feels like stone. It feels warm, safe. She lowers herself gently, sitting closer to the fire, her eyes never leaving the flames. Each flicker of light seems to tell a quiet story. Each movement feels slow, intentional, soothing. Outside, somewhere far away, the snow continues to fall. But here, there is no cold, no wind, no emptiness, only warmth, only light, only stillness. The little girl brings her knees closer to her chest, resting her chin lightly against them. Her body begins to relax in a way it has not all day. Her breathing slows, in and out, soft and steady. She listens to the fire. Crack, soft crackle, a gentle shift of wood. The sound is comforting, predictable, safe. She closes her eyes for just a moment, just to feel it more deeply. And in that moment, another sensation appears. A scent, soft at first, then clearer, warm, rich, familiar. She opens her eyes slowly and looks toward the fire again. But something has changed. Near the fireplace, a table now stands. It was not there before. She is sure of it. But now it is. Simple, wooden, and on it, there is something resting. Something that gently releases warmth into the air. Something that fills the room with its comforting scent. A meal, warm, steaming softly in the quiet room. The little girl stares at it, her eyes calm, but filled with quiet wonder. She does not rush. She does not move quickly. Everything feels slow here. Peaceful, like time itself has softened. She shifts slightly closer, her movements careful, as if she is afraid to disturb the delicate stillness. The warmth of the fire continues to wrap around her. The scent grows richer. Her stomach feels the warmth before she even takes a bite. For a moment, she simply sits there, looking, breathing, feeling. The cold feels very far away now, almost like a memory, and yet, somewhere deep inside, she knows this moment is fragile, like the flame in her hand, like something that could disappear if she is not careful. The match still burns between her fingers. Its flame is smaller now, quieter, but still alive, still glowing, still holding this world together. She watches it for a moment, the small golden light, so simple, and yet it has created all of this. She brings her gaze back to the fire, to the warmth, to the quiet room that now surrounds her, and slowly, very slowly, she begins to reach toward the table, as if drawn by something deeper than hunger, something softer, something that feels like comfort, like home, like a place she has always been searching for. without even knowing it. Her hand moves slowly through the warm air, as if she is moving through something soft and invisible. The table is close now, close enough for her to feel the gentle warmth rising from the meal. She pauses, not because she is afraid, but because the moment feels delicate, quiet, almost sacred. The fire continues to crackle behind her, its sound steady and comforting, like a calm rhythm that fills the space without ever demanding attention. The light flickers softly across the wooden walls, across the table, across her small hands. Everything feels slower here, softer, as if time itself has chosen to rest. The little girl lowers her hand slightly, letting her fingers hover just above the surface of the table. The wood feels smooth, warm, real. She closes her eyes for a brief moment, just to feel it more clearly. And when she opens them again, the meal before her seems even more vivid. Steam rises gently, curling into the air like soft white ribbons. The scent is comforting, deep, and familiar in a way she cannot fully explain. It reminds her of something distant, something long ago, a memory she cannot quite reach, but can still feel. Her breathing slows, in and out. Each breath carries warmth into her chest. Each exhale releases a little more of the cold that once held her. She shifts closer, very slowly. The chair beside the table seems to invite her, its soft cushion glowing faintly in the firelight. She hesitates only for a moment, then gently sits. The softness beneath her feels almost surprising. Her body relaxes without effort. Her shoulders drop. Her hands rest lightly on her lap. For a moment, she does nothing. She simply sits, listening, feeling, being. The room is silent, but not empty. It is filled with a quiet presence, a calm, a stillness that feels alive in its own gentle way. The little girl lifts her gaze once more toward the table. The meal waits patiently. There is no rush, no urgency, only quiet invitation. She slowly reaches forward again, this time allowing her fingers to touch the edge of the dish. Warm, comforting, real. She takes a small piece, carefully, as if she is learning something new. Her movements are slow, deliberate, gentle. She brings the food closer, pauses again, then, softly, she tastes it. The warmth spreads instantly, not just through her mouth, but through her whole body. A soft, quiet feeling of relief, of comfort, of something being restored. Her eyes close again, this time a little longer. She breathes in, slowly, holding the moment, holding the warmth, holding the quiet peace that surrounds her. The fire behind her continues its gentle rhythm. Crack, soft shift, low flicker. The light dances across the room in slow golden waves. Nothing moves quickly. Nothing demands anything from her. For the first time in a long time, she does not feel cold. She does not feel alone. She eats slowly. Each small bite is enough. Each moment stretches softly, like a calm dream that has no end. Outside, far beyond this warm space, the snow continues to fall. Soft, endless, silent. But here, inside this gentle light, there is no cold, no wind, no darkness. Only warmth, only calm, only the quiet presence of something safe. The little girl leans back slightly in the chair. Her body feels lighter now, warmer. Her hands rest softly against the table. Her breathing remains slow and steady. And then, very gently, another change begins. At first, it is only a shift in the light. The fire flickers differently. The shadows move in a new way. The air itself feels slightly different, softer, deeper. She opens her eyes slowly and looks around. The room is still there. The fire still burns. The table still stands before her. But now, there is something more. Something subtle. Something that feels like a memory beginning to take shape. Near the far side of the room, a soft glow appears. Faint, gentle, almost like a reflection of the fire. But not quite. The little girl watches it quietly. She does not move. She does not question it. She simply observes. The glow becomes clearer, brighter, but still soft. And slowly, very slowly, it begins to form into something familiar. A shape, a presence, something that feels warm, not just in the air, but deep inside her. Her breath catches softly, not from fear, but from recognition. A feeling she has not felt in a long time. A feeling of being known, of being seen. Her heart moves gently in her chest, slow, calm. She leans forward just slightly, her eyes focused on the growing light. The fire continues its quiet song behind her. The room remains still. Time seems to pause, waiting. The shape becomes clearer, closer, more real with each passing second, and the warmth in her chest grows stronger, softer, deeper, like something returning to her, like something that was never truly gone. She does not speak. She does not need to, because in this quiet, glowing moment, she understands. Something is coming, something gentle, something kind, something that belongs to her, in a way nothing else ever has. And as the light slowly takes its final shape, the little girl sits very still, very calm, her small hands resting softly against the table, her breathing slow and peaceful, waiting, not with fear, but with a quiet, growing sense of comfort. The warmth lingers for a moment, soft, gentle, comforting, but slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first, it begins to fade. The firelight dims. The warmth in the air grows thinner. The soft glow around the room flickers. Once, twice, and then it disappears. The little girl opens her eyes. The chair is gone. The table is gone. The warm room is gone. She is back, between the cold walls of the narrow street. The snow is still falling. The wind returns softly, brushing against her face. The cold touches her again, quietly, gently, but unmistakably. The match in her fingers has burned down to a small black stick. A thin line of smoke rises and disappears into the night. For a moment, she does not move. She simply sits there, feeling the difference between what was and what is. The cold is real again, but the memory of warmth remains, a soft echo inside her. She lowers her gaze to the matches in her hand. There are still many left. She hesitates only briefly this time, not out of fear, but out of longing, for that warmth again, for that quiet feeling of peace. She takes another match. Her fingers move slowly, carefully. The world around her is silent. Even the wind seems to pause. She strikes the match, a soft scratch, a brief spark, and once again, a small flame appears. This one burns a little brighter, a little steadier. The golden light spreads outward, pushing back the darkness just enough. The little girl watches it closely. Her eyes reflect the flame, calm and still. She brings it closer to her, closer to her face, closer to her hands. And once again, the world begins to change. This time, the light does not become a room. Instead, it becomes something simpler, something closer, in front of her. A warm stove appears, old, simple, made of iron, but glowing with a deep, steady heat. The kind of warmth that fills a space slowly, completely. The little girl moves closer without thinking. She stretches her hands toward it, and the warmth reaches her instantly. stronger than before. Deeper, it touches her fingers, her palms, her arms, moving through her like a quiet wave. Her shoulders relax again. Her breath softens. She leans forward slightly, as if drawn by the comfort of it. The stove glows brighter. Steady, reliable, safe. She places her hands closer, just enough to feel the heat fully. And for a moment, she almost forgets the snow, almost forgets the cold street, almost forgets everything except this simple warmth. Her eyes close slowly, just for a second, just to stay in the feeling a little longer. The silence wraps around her again, soft, gentle, endless. But just as before, the flame begins to weaken. The light flickers, the warmth fades, the stove dims, slowly, quietly, until it is no longer there. The little girl opens her eyes again. The cold returns, the stone walls, the falling snow, the quiet night. She exhales softly, a small breath that disappears into the cold air. The match has gone out. Another thin line of smoke rises and fades. She looks down again. There are fewer matches now, but still enough. Enough for one more moment, one more warmth, one more quiet escape from the cold. She takes another match. This time, there is no hesitation at all. She strikes it gently. The flame appears again, soft, golden, alive. And as she watches it, something new begins to form within the light. Not warmth this time, not a stove. Something different, something softer, something almost joyful. The light grows brighter, and within it, she begins to see a table, larger than before, covered with a clean white cloth, and on it, a beautiful meal. More than she has seen all day, more than she has felt in a long time. The scent rises again, warm, rich, inviting, and for a moment, the cold world disappears once more. The small flame steadies, soft, golden, quietly alive in the cold night, and within its gentle light, the image becomes clearer. The table stands before her, long, simple, covered with a clean white cloth that glows faintly in the warmth of candlelight. Candles appear one by one, their flames calm and still, as if they have always been there. Their light is not bright, it is soft, kind, welcoming. The little girl watches in silence, her eyes reflecting the quiet glow. And then she sees it, at the center of the table, resting peacefully as if waiting just for her. A roasted goose, golden, perfectly warm. Its skin glistens gently, and from within it rises a soft steam that curls into the air. There is a gentle scent, rich, comforting, almost impossible to ignore. But she does not rush. She never rushes. Her small body remains still, her hands resting softly near her lap. She only watches, as if afraid that even the smallest movement might break the fragile beauty of this moment. The candles flicker once, gently. The light dances across the table, across the goose, across her face. And then something unexpected happens. The goose moves, very slowly, almost playfully. It shifts. It lifts itself from the plate. The little girl's eyes widen just slightly, not with fear, but with quiet wonder. The scene remains calm, unhurried. The goose steps down from the table, as if it carries no weight at all. In its side, a knife and fork are still gently placed, as if part of the dream itself. It moves toward her, slowly, gracefully, almost like a gentle offering. The little girl does not move. She does not step back. She simply watches, her breath soft and steady. The warmth in the air grows stronger as it comes closer. The scent surrounds her now. comforting, rich, filling the quiet space with something that feels almost like care. She lifts her hands slightly, not to take, but to feel, to be close, to understand. But just as the moment reaches its soft, perfect stillness, the flame flickers. Once, twice, the light trembles. The warmth begins to pull away. The candles dim. The table fades. The goose slows, becomes still again, and then it disappears. The little girl lowers her hand gently. The silence returns. The snow, the cold, the narrow street, the quiet night. She is back again. The match in her fingers has burned down, leaving only a thin trail of smoke that dissolves into the dark. She breathes out softly. A small cloud of white appears in the cold air and fades just as quickly. For a moment, she says nothing, does nothing. She simply sits there, holding the memory of warmth inside her. It does not hurt. Not exactly. It feels more like a quiet longing, a soft echo, something gentle that came and went. She looks down again. Fewer matches now. Her fingers, still cold, move slowly over them. They feel small, light, but powerful in their own quiet way. She understands now. Each one brings a moment, a feeling, a glimpse of something beyond the cold. She takes another match. Carefully, gently. There is no hesitation left, only a quiet need for warmth, for light, for something soft in the endless night. She strikes it, a soft sound, a small spark, and once again, the flame appears. This one burns brighter, clearer. The golden light expands more quickly this time, as if it already knows what to do. The little girl watches closely. Her breathing slows again. The cold fades slightly, and then, within the light, a new image begins to form. Not a table, not a stove, something higher, something distant. The light stretches upward, wider, softer, and slowly. She begins to see a tree, a tall tree, covered in gentle light, its branches filled with small glowing candles, each one steady, each one shining softly in the quiet darkness. The little girl's eyes lift upward, following the light, following the shape. Her face softens. There is something about this sight, something peaceful, something almost magical. The flame continues to burn, holding the image in place, and for a moment, she forgets the cold again. The flame burns steadily now, brighter than the others, calmer, as if it has found its purpose. And in its light, the world opens once again. The little girl slowly lifts her gaze. Before her, a tree rises into view, tall, beautiful, and impossibly still. It stands in a place that is not quite the narrow street, and not quite somewhere else either. It feels like a space between moments, between cold and warmth, between reality and memory. The tree is large enough that she cannot see its top at first. Its branches stretch outward gently, like quiet arms holding the night itself. And on those branches, small lights begin to glow, one by one. Soft candles appear, as if they are being awakened by the flame in her hand. Each one shines with a gentle golden light, not bright, not overwhelming, but warm, deeply warm. The little girl watches without moving. Her breath slows again, in and out. The cold around her feels distant now, not gone, but quieter, as if it is standing far away, waiting. The tree becomes clearer, more real, more alive. Its light reflects softly on the snow beneath it, turning the ground into a field of faint gold and silver. The world feels larger in this moment, yet also more peaceful. The little girl's eyes move slowly from branch to branch. Each candle flickers gently, Never too strong, never too weak. They do not burn like ordinary fire. They feel calm, like small pieces of comfort scattered through the darkness. Her hand holding the match trembles slightly. Not from cold this time, but from something softer, something unfamiliar, something almost like emotion rising quietly in her chest. She does not understand it fully, but she feels it. The flame in her hand begins to respond. It flickers in rhythm with the candles in the tree, as if they are connected, as if they recognize each other. The tree seems to lean closer in the light, not physically, but in presence, as if it is becoming part of her world. The little girl shifts slightly where she sits. The snow beneath her no longer feels sharp. It feels distant, muted. The air around her grows warmer again, but differently than before. Not like a stove, not like food, but like memory, like something long forgotten, returning gently. She keeps looking at the tree. There is something she feels she should remember, something just beyond reach. Her eyes move slowly upward again, toward the top of the tree. And there, she sees something brighter, a single light, stronger than the others, but still gentle, still soft. It does not flicker like the rest. It glows steadily, as if it is waiting. The little girl stares at it for a long time. The sound of the wind fades slightly. Even the falling snow seems quieter now. Everything feels paused, held in place by that one steady light. Her fingers loosen slightly around the match, not letting go, but resting, as if even her body understands this moment is different. The tree remains still. The candles remain lit. The light continues to glow. And then, very slowly, the girl feels something else, a feeling she cannot name. Not hunger, not cold, not comfort exactly. Something deeper, something familiar in a way she cannot explain. Her lips part slightly, but no words come out. The flame in her hand flickers again, and for a moment, the light from the tree seems to grow closer. Just a little, just enough. The branches seem softer now, less distant, more welcoming. The candles shimmer gently, as if acknowledging her presence. The little girl leans forward very slightly, almost without realizing it. Her eyes are fixed on the glowing tree, and in that quiet, suspended moment, the world feels as if it is holding its breath with her. The snow, the wind, the night, all of it becomes still. And then, a faint sound begins to rise, very soft, almost like a memory forming into sound, a distant warmth in the silence. The girl listens without moving, her eyes still on the light, her heart very calm, very slow, and the flame in her hand continues to burn, steady, golden, quiet, holding the moment together, as if it knows. This is not just a vision anymore. This is something that is about to change. The light in the highest candle shines steadily, soft, warm, and deeply calm. The little girl does not move. She only watches. And in the stillness of that glowing tree, something begins to shift, not in the world around her, but in the feeling inside her chest. The air becomes quieter, not empty, but full of something gentle, like a memory returning slowly, carefully, as if it does not want to scare her. The candles on the tree flicker softly in unison. One by one, they seem to dim the cold around her. The snow no longer feels sharp. The wind no longer feels harsh. Everything becomes softer, far away, very far away. She hears a sound. It is not part of the street, not part of the night. It is something else, something familiar, a voice perhaps. Not loud, not sudden, but kind. The little girl's eyes slowly shift from the tree. Her breathing becomes even slower, in and out. And then she sees it. At first, it is only a shape within the light, a faint outline forming behind the glowing branches. She does not understand it at first, but she does not fear it, because the feeling that comes with it is not fear. It is warmth, deep warmth. The shape becomes clearer, a figure, soft, gentle, moving toward her slowly, as if it has been waiting for a long time. The little girl's lips part slightly. Her hand holding the match lowers a little, not falling, just loosening. The figure steps closer into the light of the tree, and now she sees it clearly. An old woman, kind face, soft eyes, a gentle expression filled not with sadness, but with love. The girl's chest tightens slightly, but not in pain, in recognition. She has seen this face before, not here, not in this night, but somewhere far away, somewhere warm. The old woman smiles faintly, and in that smile, something inside the little girl begins to soften completely. The cold around her feels even farther away now, almost gone. The wind is no longer something she notices. The snow no longer touches her the same way. Only the light remains, only the warmth. The old woman moves closer, slowly, carefully, as if every step is made of memory. The little girl does not move back. She does not move forward either. She simply stays where she is, watching. The candles in the tree glow brighter for a moment, as if recognizing the presence, as if welcoming it. The old woman kneels slightly in front of her. Her expression never changes. It remains calm, peaceful, full of quiet understanding. The little girl feels something rise in her chest, something she cannot stop, something soft and overwhelming and gentle all at once. Her eyes begin to blur slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper. The old woman lifts her hand slowly, not touching her yet, just near her, like a promise, like a memory finally becoming real. And then, very softly, the little girl hears the voice again, not from outside, but from within the light, from within the moment itself. It is gentle, warm, familiar, a voice that does not rush, does not demand, only calls her softly, like someone calling her home. The little girl's hand finally loosens fully. The match between her fingers grows smaller now, dimmer, but she does not look at it anymore. Her eyes are on the old woman. The tree behind them glows softly. The candles shimmer like distant stars, and the world feels as if it is holding its breath. The old woman opens her arms slowly, not wide, just enough to say, "You are not alone." The little girl finally moves, very slowly, almost like she is walking through a dream. She leans forward, one small step at a time. The snow beneath her feels lighter now. The cold no longer reaches her the same way. And as she comes closer, the warmth becomes complete, not from fire, not from light, but from presence, from love, from memory. And the little girl finally steps into the old woman's embrace. The world around them becomes still. The candles on the tree glow softly one last time, and everything becomes quiet, very quiet. Like a lullaby the night has been singing all along. The embrace is not sudden. It does not shock the world. It does not break the silence. Instead, it feels like something that has been waiting for a very long time finally arriving where it belongs. The little girl leans into the old woman's arms slowly, as if her body already understands this is the safest place it has ever known. The warmth is not like fire. It is not like the stove. It is not like food or light. It is something deeper, something that does not fade, something that stays. Around them, the tree of candles still glows softly, each flame steady, calm, unmoving. But now they feel distant, like stars watching from far away. The little girl does not look at them anymore. Her eyes are closed halfway. Her breathing is slow, peaceful, almost like sleep. The old woman holds her gently. No words are spoken now. None are needed. Everything that needed to be said feels already understood. The night around them begins to change very slowly. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but softly, like the turning of a page. The wind begins to quiet even more. The falling snow becomes lighter, finer, almost like dust drifting through light instead of ice falling from the sky. The narrow street, once sharp and cold, begins to feel distant, less real, as if it is slowly stepping away from the moment. The little girl feels none of this with fear, only calm, a deep, heavy calm that spreads through her small, body-like warmth returning after a very long winter. The old woman gently adjusts her hold, as if making sure the girl is comfortable. Her hand rests softly on the child's back, steady, reassuring. The glow from the unseen candles reflects faintly around them, creating a soft halo in the quiet space. Time does not feel like time anymore. It feels slower, heavier, kinder. The little girl's thoughts begin to drift, not in confusion, but in softness, like a dream that is not trying to end. She remembers things she cannot fully see, a warm room that feels far away, a voice calling her name gently, a feeling of safety she once knew. Long ago, before cold nights and empty streets, her fingers, still loosely holding the last match, finally relax completely. The match falls gently from her hand. It does not make a sound. It simply disappears into the quiet snow beneath them. The old woman does not react. She only holds the girl a little closer. The candles on the tree begin to fade, one by one, not extinguished, just less present, like they have fulfilled their purpose. The light softens. The world grows quieter. The street around them becomes almost invisible now, as if it is no longer part of the story. Only the embrace remains. Only the warmth remains. The little girl's breathing slows even more. Her head rests gently against the old woman's shoulder. Her body no longer feels the cold at all, not even as a memory. The last traces of winter seem to drift away from her like something unimportant. The night itself feels as if it is stepping back, respectfully, quietly, giving space to something gentler. The old woman looks down at the child in her arms. Her expression is unchanged, still calm, still kind, but there is something in it that feels like completion, like a journey that has reached its final moment. The little girl's eyes close fully now, not forced, not sudden, just naturally, as if her body has finally found what it was searching for all along. The snow around them continues to fall, but it no longer feels cold. It feels distant, like it belongs to another place, another time. The tree of candles is almost gone now. Only a faint glow remains in the air, soft, barely there. The old woman stands slowly, still holding the child. There is no effort in her movement, no weight, only stillness. The street, the snow, the night, all of it begins to fade gently around them, not disappearing violently, but dissolving softly, like breath in cold air. And in that fading world, the little girl remains safe, warm, finally at rest. Everything is very quiet now. The world no longer feels like it is moving forward. It feels like it is resting. The little girl is still held in the arms of the old woman. Her body is light, almost weightless, as if the cold, the hunger, and the long wandering through the streets were all slowly dissolving into something softer. There is no struggle in her anymore, no searching, only calm, The old woman continues to hold her gently, standing still in the quiet space where the street once was. Around them, the last traces of the candle tree have almost completely faded. Only a faint memory of light remains in the air, like warmth that does not need a flame anymore. The snow falls more slowly now, each flake drifting downward as if it is no longer in a hurry to reach the ground. Even the wind has stopped trying to speak. Everything is still. The little girl's face is peaceful, not because she is dreaming, but because she is finally not afraid. The old woman looks down at her for a long time. Her expression is unchanged, but it carries something that feels like understanding, as if she has been here many times before, as if this moment is part of something larger than both of them. The cold street begins to lose its shape. Edges soften. Walls fade. Distance becomes unclear. It is no longer certain where the street ends or where the world begins. Only silence remains. The kind of silence that does not feel empty, but complete. The old woman begins to move slowly, still holding the child close. Each step she takes feels lighter than the air around them. There is no sound beneath her feet, no resistance, no weight, only movement through stillness. The world around them continues to fade gently. The snow becomes less visible. The buildings dissolve into pale outlines. Even the sky seems to soften into a quiet, endless glow. The little girl does not open her eyes. She does not need to. There is nothing left to look for, nothing left to fear. The old woman's presence is steady, like a final answer to a question that was never spoken aloud. As they move forward, the air becomes warmer, not like fire, not like the small matches, but like something eternal, something that does not fade when the flame is gone. The last remaining light of the night begins to disappear behind them, slowly, softly, without sound, and in its place, something else begins to appear. Not bright, not sharp, but gentle. A soft, endless calm that feels like the end of a long journey. The old woman does not look back. There is no need. Everything that mattered is already with her. The little girl's breathing remains slow and steady, almost like sleep, almost like peace that has finally found its place. The world around them is now barely there at all. Only a quiet sense of passing remains, as if the night itself is bowing gently and stepping aside. The snow is gone now, or perhaps it is simply no longer falling in this place. The cold is gone too, not fought against, just no longer present, and in this final softness, the old woman continues forward, carrying the child through a space that is no longer street, no longer night, no longer winter. Only stillness, only warmth, only quiet continuation. And for the first time in a long time, there is nothing unfinished, nothing waiting, nothing left behind, only peace. The world is very still now, not silent in a way that feels empty, but silent in a way that feels finished. There is no longer a cold street, no longer a dark corner where the little girl once sat. Only a soft, endless quiet remains. The night has passed without anyone noticing. Slowly, gently, it has turned into dawn. A pale light begins to rise in the sky. Not bright at first, just enough to soften the darkness, enough to make everything feel calmer. In this early morning light, the snow-covered city looks different, quieter, softer, as if it has been washed clean by the night. People begin to wake. Windows slowly light up one by one. The world continues as it always does. But something small is missing from the cold corner of the street, where the little girl once sat. There is nothing now but snow. Smooth, undisturbed, peaceful. A passerby walking through the morning notices the space briefly. No movement, no sound, only stillness. But there is no sadness in the air, only quiet, as if something has gently moved on, without struggle, without pain, without noise. The wind is calm now. Soft morning air replaces the harshness of the night. The city breathes again, slowly, naturally. Far above the streets, the sky is pale and wide. Light spreads across the rooftops, touching everything gently. It does not rush. It does not demand. It simply arrives. The world continues forward. But somewhere beyond what can be seen, there is a feeling of warmth that does not belong to the morning sun alone. A warmth that does not fade. A warmth that feels like memory itself. And if one were to listen very closely to the silence left behind, it would not feel empty. It would feel complete, as if something fragile was finally no longer alone. As if a long night of cold wandering has finally ended. And in that ending, there is no cruelty, only quiet understanding. The story of the little girl does not remain in the cold street. It moves somewhere else, somewhere soft, somewhere peaceful, somewhere beyond the reach of winter. And the world, unchanged on its surface, continues to turn gently in the morning light. The snow melts slowly at the edges of the city. Life begins again, but in a quieter way, a softer way. And the night, the long, endless night, is finally over. As this sleep story comes to an end, we return once again to The Little Match Girl, a tale written by Hans Christian Andersen, but one that has lived far beyond its original pages. Because this story is not really only about a little girl in the snow. It is about something much more universal, something every person understands in their own way. It is about being unseen, about walking through a world that feels too busy to notice you, and about the quiet places where human warmth should have been, but sometimes isn't. The little girl in this story did not have power or safety or comfort. She had only small matches, but each match became something greater than it should have been. A moment of warmth, a moment of imagination, a moment where the world briefly felt different. And that is what makes this story so meaningful, because it shows us something important. Even when life feels cold, even when circumstances feel heavy, even when everything seems distant, the human mind still searches for light, still searches for warmth, still searches for hope. And sometimes, even the smallest spark can feel like an entire world. As you listen to this sleep story, maybe you noticed how the tone slowly softened, how the cold became quieter, how the world around her transformed not through force, but through feeling that is intentional. Because sleep stories are not just stories. They are experiences designed to guide your mind into calmness, into stillness, into rest. Now, as you lie down and prepare for sleep, take a moment to bring your attention back to yourself, your breathing, your body, the space you are in right now. You are safe. You are here. And for this moment, nothing is required of you. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to solve anything. You do not need to go anywhere. Just rest. Just listen. Just exist. And if your mind is still holding on to parts of the day, imagine them slowly becoming softer, less sharp, more distant, like footprints in fresh snow slowly disappearing as time passes. Because just like in the story, every night eventually becomes morning. Every cold moment eventually softens, and every difficult feeling eventually moves on. Now, before we close this story, I want to ask you something gently. If you were in the place of the little match girl, not in a perfect world, but in that cold night, alone, with only a few matches in your hand, what would you have done? Would you have tried to sell them again? Would you have searched for help? Would you have lit them slowly, one by one, just to feel warmth for a few seconds at a time? Or would you have done something entirely different? Take a moment to think about it, and if you feel like it, you can write your answer in the comments below. I read them all, and often those answers shape the next sleep story on this channel, because every viewer brings a different perspective, a different emotion, a different understanding of these quiet stories. And that is what makes this space special. If you enjoyed this sleep story, and if it helped you relax even a little, you can support the channel by liking the video. It genuinely helps these calm stories reach more people who might need them. People who are tired, people who are overthinking, people who simply need a quiet voice to help them slow down. And if you want to continue this journey, you can subscribe. Because there are many more stories like this waiting. Stories about storms and shelter, about lost places and found peace, about nights that feel endless, and the small moments that make them softer. But for now, you do not need to go anywhere else. You do not need to think further ahead. You can simply stay here, in this quiet moment. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts fade gently into the background and allow yourself to drift, slowly, naturally, into sleep. And as you do, remember this. Even in the coldest night, even in the quietest place, a small light can still mean everything. Good night.